Troutdale City. Got it. All right, we'll start off, and I guess I'm first, so I'll lead the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please call the roll.
Councilor President Rittman.
Here.
Councilor Caswell.
Here.
Hahn.
Here.
Councilor White.
Here.
Councilor Wittrin.
Present.
Councilor Glantz.
Present.
And Mayor Lauer is.
Mayor Lauer is excused because he's not feeling well. And we wish him well. Get well soon. We'll go on to an agenda update. Anything, Ray?
Council President, no, the agenda is as written tonight.
All right. Well, we'll start off as usual with public comment. Public comment on agenda items will be taken at the time the item is considered. Public comment should be directed to the presiding officer and limited to matters of community interest or related to matters which may or could come before the council. Each speaker shall be limited to 5 minutes for each agenda item unless a different amount of time is allowed by the presiding officer with the consent of council. The council and mayor should avoid immediate protracted responses to citizen comments. I don't see anyone in the room. Do we have public comment from Zoom land? Well, I don't see anyone wanting to make public comments, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. And since I'm first, I'll read the consent agenda. 3.1, minutes, September 12th, 2023 regular meeting. 3.2, a resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement between Metro and the City of Troutdale implementing the fiscal year 2023-24 Metro and local government annual waste reduction plan. I move approval.
I'll second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda is adopted. Moving on to item 4, a presentation from the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District, which we who serve on the district board call UFSWQD, very euphonious appellation. And I present Jim Middaugh, the staff director for the district.
Thank you, Councilor Rittman, members of the council. For the record, my name is Jim Middaugh. I am the executive director of the Multnomah County Drainage District and also the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District, which is quite a mouthful. Before I begin today, and I think you're going to work my slides, is that right? So I want to do a shout out to Councilor Rittman, to Ray, to Eric Mueller, and to Tanny Stephenson, who are either on our board or are supporting our effort to start up this new district. You guys have put countless hours over the last decade into this work. We wouldn't be where we are without you, and I want to let the council know that they've been really principled and effective representatives of Troutdale on the board, and I just really appreciate their advice and look forward to working with them to finish this job off. So I'm here tonight to talk about the flood safety system. Next slide, please. And that system, for those of you who aren't as familiar with it, runs essentially from the Willamette River to the Sandy River. It includes about 27 miles of earthen levees, 16 pump stations, and a lot of miles of canals and drainage ways that keep the floodplain dry. And for those of you who aren't totally familiar with the entire floodplain, it protects a lot of good things. It, of course, protects the region's most important airport and also PDX. Thinking of the Troutdale Airport, it's an important asset. In addition, it protects, next slide, I'm sorry. It protects 8,000 residents, 50% of the region's manufacturing and warehousing jobs. It protects the second largest source of drinking water in Oregon. And of course, PDX is both transportation and freight activities. And all told, it produces over $16 billion in economic benefit to our region every year. And keeping it dry is really essential to maintaining that benefit. So why are we here talking about it today? There's several reasons that I'm going to go through rather briefly. Probably most fundamentally, after Hurricane Katrina, if you guys remember Katrina, the Corps of Engineers and the Federal Emergency Management Agency increased standards for certified federal flood safety systems. We did a major assessment in partnership with the state and the feds, and we found that our system is at risk of falling out of compliance with federal standards. In addition, our system, I'll talk a little bit more about what that could mean for Troutdale in a minute. In addition, the system's over 100 years old. A lot of the components of the system are nearing the end of their useful life, and we're relying on many of the same features of the system that failed during the Memorial Day flood that wrecked Danforth. We're also seeing, regardless of what you think about causes, a huge increase in the number of extreme weather events. We're seeing it both north of us, south of us, east, west, all around the globe. You only need to open a news website on almost any day, and you're going to see news of incredibly large rain events, rain on snow events that really threaten the integrity of our system. We need to make some investments to prepare for those events. It's not a question of when they're going to hit, it's a question, not a question of if they're going to hit, it's a question of when. Another significant issue for us is the loss of federal partnership. Thank you. There are really three things I want to highlight. Perhaps most important for the residents of Troutdale is a partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, in which we stand to benefit from over $100 million in federal matching funds to enact the very projects that we need to construct to get back into federal compliance. Without a local match for those funds, which is a purpose of the new district, we'll either lose that investment opportunity or we'll have to find a different source of revenue for those investments. We were one of only 6 projects authorized nationally last year for up to $100 million. So we're very competitive right now, but we need that local match. The other partnership with the Corps of Engineers that you may not know about is called the Rehabilitation and Inspection Program. In exchange for agreeing to regular inspections by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, should there be a natural disaster, and if we maintain our system to federal standards, natural disaster damages our system, the Corps will come in and repair that damage on our behalf. It's an incredibly valuable insurance program for our region that we stand at risk of losing if we don't invest in our system. The third aspect of federal partnership includes the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Currently, we are at risk of losing accreditation from FEMA, and what that would mean would be a remapping of the floodplain and a loss of access to the federal flood insurance program, which provides low cost and subsidized affordable flood insurance for people who live behind levee systems. Because we haven't invested enough in our system, we're at risk of losing that accreditation, and that would have substantial impacts on our community. And just to talk about a few of those, currently, because of the nature of our system and the rating it has that's at risk, people are not required to buy flood insurance. Should we lose that accreditation, people would be required to buy flood insurance, and they would no longer have access to the federal program that helps with those costs. And finally, FEMA would likely come in and remap the floodplain at a higher risk. That higher risk rating would result in a required change to many of our current zoning designations, and any existing building coming in for a permit or new construction would be required to obey new building construction codes. For example, elevating the first floor above 100-year flood height. Very expensive, very disruptive to our economy. So what's our plan? We've been working for over a decade to pull together a solution to this challenge. And Dave and others have been with us the whole way, and Troutdale's been a support partner from the beginning. We hope to maintain that relationship with you. I'm going to cut to the chase and get to the numbers. We've worked with our board over the last 2 years to identify what the likely costs are for year 1 of the new district, and the board has agreed to work with us on the number $16.7 million. That's a bit of an increase from our current year, which is about 14 and some change million dollars. The additions include inflation, they include contingency, they include operating capital, they include a small amount for some new mandates the legislature created for the new district. So they're really pretty bread and butter things that you need to do to run an agency. How are we going to get the money? And I think this is the area where Councilor Rittman and others are doing great work on behalf of Troutdale, and I think there's some conversations still to be had. We see 3 sources of potential revenue that we would like to seek authority from the legislature in the session for. The first is to transfer assessments, property assessments on the floodplain. That's the authority the existing districts use. We'd like the new district to have that authority, and that would generate about $9.5 million. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about assessments in a minute. We're also looking for authority to create a new flood safety benefit tax. That tax would be allocated to the cities and to the county for unincorporated areas based on population. We estimate a need of about $6.2 million from that revenue source, and I would note that all the new costs compared to today are being shifted to that flood safety benefit tax to avoid additional compression. And finally, we provide services to others, and we do things like development reviews for which we charge. We also have cut agreements, or in the process of, we've won initial agreement with several key our local partners to provide additional service agreements to compensate for the loss of revenue due to compression on publicly owned land on the floodplain. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So another $1 million to make up for those costs to ensure we can provide services to those compressed properties. Bottom line for Troutdale, under the staff's proposal, in the current year, you're paying 11.1% of our operating costs. Staff is recommending a proposal that would reduce that contribution to 7.7%. So it's a reduction of your net percent contribution to the overall effort of operating the flood safety system. Here's some pie charts that show you the comparison between the current year and year one of the new district. There are a couple of highlights. First, I want you to note that the City of Portland's contribution increases. I also want you to note that we have new partners because we have a larger district created by the legislature. So we have some new cities and new individuals who will be contributing to our revenues. And really the standout here is that the City of Troutdale sees its contribution reduced while everybody else's are new or have gone up.
Excuse me, Jim, is everybody clear that, and correct me if I'm wrong, the current year, that funding is all coming from those that are in the floodplain? That's
correct.
When you say you are paying, I just want to make sure everybody understands that you currently is not most citizens of Troutdale. It's everybody pretty much north of I-84.
And we'll talk a little bit more
Okay,
about
so I want to make sure that when you say you are paying, and they're going to go, I don't pay anything.
Properties on the floodplain in Troutdale are paying. How about
Okay.
that? Thank you for that clarification, Ray. I appreciate it. Earlier, I mentioned those service agreements. And I just want to highlight that there are really three public entities that own the vast majority of land on the floodplain that are contributing to compression. Those three are the City of Portland, Metro, and the Port. They recognize the value of our system, and they know they have an obligation to contribute a fair share. And they've agreed to work with us to develop intergovernmental agreements to provide revenue to offset compression losses so we can provide adequate services. So that reduces a total of $1.5 million in compression in year one to about $600,000 of compression impact, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second. In addition, as we shift to a new district and we have one rate structure, obligated to have one rate structure across the floodplain, former SDIC properties that are currently not subject to compression will become subject to compression. Now, it's a lumpy surface, but what I want to point out is that many properties that currently don't benefit from compression on the floodplain in Troutdale will benefit from compression. I've listed some sample properties that are suffering from compression now, and you can see they see a significant rate reduction because of that. It's not an even surface. There's still some impact, and I'll go into a little bit more about what that looks like. Councilor Rittman has been incredibly consistent and principled, as have others from East County, about wanting to really fight hard against any cost shifts from compression to the east side. And we've worked as a staff to listen to that and try and address that to the degree we can. I do want to say, as the director of a special district on the floodplain in Portland, I can't change Oregon's constitution. I wish I could. I would fix this problem once and for all. Instead, what we've tried to do is really minimize the impact at the direction of our board, and in particular, Councilor Rittman. We worked with Eric Mueller to identify an analysis that would try and help us shape what we think that compression cost shift might be for Troutdale. We had to look at every individual property, and I want to share with you that these are estimates based on estimates. We don't have a history of compression on SDIC properties, so we don't have the data set that we have for all the other districts. But we've made our best assumptions about what that impact might be, and we've been conservative in those assumptions. And by that, what I mean is we think there's going to be more compression in Troutdale than we are reflecting. So we think this cost shift is lower than what I'm going to talk about today. But all in all, after working with Eric and others, we've identified approximately 0.7% of the total revenue from the assessments on the floodplain could be cost shifted to properties on the floodplain in Troutdale. That's less than $75,000. I want to share with you that all of the Troutdale properties on the floodplain are zoned commercial or they're publicly owned. It doesn't mean this isn't an impact, and I don't want to minimize the impact. These are commercial properties. The average increase for each of those properties based on the shift is less than $225, and that's a lot of money, I admit it. But when you look at these properties' tax bills, it's less than 1% of their total property tax bill, and most of them it's less than 0.5%. And finally, while we still love these companies because they create jobs and revenues for us, out-of-state companies will bear approximately $46,000 of that $75,000 shift, meaning the local impact's about $29,000. And I'm sorry, I can't eliminate that entirely. We've worked really hard to do so, and we're going to keep looking at it. So people say, how come you can't eliminate it all? Isn't there a better option than assessments on the floodplain? So let's take a quick look at a few of the options that we believe are workable. And we've done years of due diligence looking at different options, and we're doing more at the request of Councillor Ritma. We've hired an outside consultant and outside legal. We're meeting with the regional government affairs people to try and find additional tools that could continue to shave away at this compression problem. But properties in Portland, which I know is a concern for Councillor Ritma and others in the east side, shifting their costs to the east. In the current year, properties within the city of Portland pay 81.2% of our operating costs. In staff's proposal for year one, that contribution goes up to 81.9%. If we were to implement an additional flood safety tax on the floodplain instead of assessments, that contribution would drop from the staff proposal to 81.4%. Let's look at East County properties. Gresham, Fairview, and Troutdale. Currently combined, the properties in that area contribute 18.8% of our operating revenue. The staff's proposal reduces that contribution to 18.1%, while an alternative tax on the floodplain would increase that to 18.6% of what the staff is recommending. And finally, I know that a lot of people believe or are concerned that the port doesn't pay its fair share then, and it should, and the port agrees with that. In the current year, the port's contributing 37.5% of our revenue. The staff proposal increases that to 38.1%. A floodplain tax would reduce it below the current year to 36.6%. You may have noticed that asterisk next to the word alternative on all three of these slides. That asterisk is to remind me that these calculations do not consider any costs from collection of that tax on the floodplain. And currently, our two largest partners, Gresham and Portland, have said they're not willing to do it for us. So we would need to find an alternative means and likely would have to do it independently. And those costs are likely to be substantial, both in billing and customer service, but there's also another really important factor for you to know. Collection's a killer. We worked with the Revenue Bureau, who's collecting the Portland Arts tax and the Homeless Services tax for Metro. We talked to Northwest Natural. We talked to a consultant that Eric Mueller referred us to, who runs a company that does revenue collection. We talked to the city of Hood River, who collects tolling off their bridge. All of those entities suggested that in year one of this new tax, we should expect to collect only 60% of what we bill. And a terminal collection rate in year 5 to 7 would end up being about 80%. So if you look at what we would have to increase our bill rate to collect adequate revenue, you could see in year one, it would be about 3.5 million. And even under the best circumstances, it would be about 1.3 million, not including customer service and billing costs. So when I look at 1.3 million under the best scenario without customer service or billing costs, and I compare that to 29,000, the least worst choice seems clear to me. And finally, I've heard some talk about the fact that SDIC is in pretty good shape and other districts are not in good shape. I don't want to compare district to district, and SDIC has been very capably managed. It's in decent shape. That said, a third of the length of levee within SDIC does not meet current fragility standards. That's over a mile of levee. That's going to require significant earthwork. The SDIC pump station needs to be replaced and put on higher ground, and the size of that pump station must be increased as well. The head wall behind that pump station needs to be rebuilt entirely, and the levee next to the pump station needs to be raised. Here's just a picture from 1986 that shows that pump station nearly underwater. Because you can see the electrical boxes there, we were unable to send staff safely in to operate that pump station. And again, we're expecting worse weather events rather than less. We estimate that those projects that I just described would cost an estimated $25 million in capital. That represents about 15% of the construction program that the federal government's going to fund with $100 million. So under our scenario, if we can move forward, this 25 million would come from federal and regional sources and not be solely on the backs of properties within SDIC or the City of Troutdale. So in closing, I've covered this really fast. There's an awful lot of detail here. Troutdale's been an amazing partner for almost a decade in trying to fix this problem and ensure that we keep our community safe and that our flood safety system is on a sustainable funding basis. Safety of people, our economy, and $100 million in federal investment are at risk if we don't act. The staff proposal that's on the table and that a majority of the board asked us to move forward cuts compression by over half and reduces Troutdale's share of our operating costs. We are anxious as we work with the legislature during the short session to add additional tools that will allow us to continue to chip away at assessments and reduce the impact of compression, but we need willing partners and time to make that happen. So we're going to look for additional tools in that legislative session that will allow us to continue to reduce that down to zero. And then finally, I want to share that we've looked at a lot of other options and we're looking hard at some new ones that Ed and Councilor Ritma have proposed to us. And what we've found so far is that other options cost Troutdale and the region more primarily because of collection. And they also face what I would argue is likely insurmountable political opposition. So we appreciate Troutdale's past support. We ask for your continued support, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And I want to again express my deep appreciation for Councilor Ritma and Ray and Tanny and Eric, who have just been incredibly great allies in trying to make this work for Troutdale. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I'm planning to make a report to the council from my perspective, but do you have any questions right now of Mr. Middaugh?
I
do. Sure, Sandy.
Yep. First of all, I keep seeing references to year one and this year. And it's great that it shows Troutdale being reduced, but would that be the case in future years, or is what it is now versus what it's being proposed a more static representation?
Thank you for the question. So we're transitioning from 4 legacy drainage districts to 1 new district. So that transition from the last year of the legacy districts to the new district is what we're describing as year 1. And we are proposing that that flood safety privilege tax that would go on the entire new district be capped at CPI. And
What's CPI?
Consumer Price Index, capped at inflation.
Okay.
And that the board would not, by statute, would not have the opportunity to increase that tax on the entire district. And then we're proposing that assessments continue to be subject to decisions by the board. I would tell you that a 10% rate increase in assessments today generates about $750,000. So it will be relatively static, but there will continue to be increases based on inflation primarily.
And is the plan that it would go on our property tax bill?
So we're proposing 2 sources of revenue. The first would be property assessments on the floodplain. So properties on the floodplain would receive a bill from Multnomah County just like they do today. And then we're proposing a new tax, the flood safety benefit tax, and we're working collaboratively with our city partners to implement that tax. We're allocating that cost to the cities and the county by population, and we're creating legislative changes that would give the cities significant flexibility in how to address collecting that revenue from your residents.
And then on compression, compression's a little fuzzy. My base understanding is that because of, property tax limitations, there's only a certain amount of tax increases and percentages that can happen. Would this impact our ability in future years to raise our taxes because we're not as compressed as Portland?
It's going to depend on a lot of different factors, and I'm going to confess I'm not an expert in compression, but there is a cap on the overall growth in general government taxes tied to property. When that cap is reached, the costs spread to other non-compressed properties. And so it doesn't necessarily mean a limitation. It might mean a difference in who pays that tax. It also might depend on the nature of that tax and how it's accrued.
So I may add here, Council President, I knew when we did the staff report that this issue of compression would come up, but I didn't want the staff report to be another 20 pages long. Compression is complicated, but I do have a memo from the League of Oregon Cities in 2017 that in 8 pages gives you a primer on what Measure 5 and 50 did and how it created this thing called compression. So I will forward that on to everybody, just so you can do your homework, and if it's kind of a question for you.
Oh, boy. Sounds like
Yeah,
fun.
it is complicated and it is a pain to deal with.
I mean, at the end of the day, it requires really a property by property analysis, and it, you know, it's improvements, it's sales, it's lots of things that impact how that rate is, how that rate changes over time.
You'll want to read it with coffee in the morning, not this hour of the evening.
Or maybe with a beer, I don't know. You could take two approaches to that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. I regret not being an expert on
Brian,
compression.
did you have a question?
Yeah, Jim, you know, when we first entered into this, it was to do the study, and then I'm just curious how legislation picked up on forming this district. Was that your group? Did they lobby legislation?
Thank you for the question. It precedes me, but what happened was a coalition was formed called Levy Ready Columbia. Troutdale was a member of that coalition. It included all the local governments, some business groups, the port, some community-based organizations, and they got together and funded a study to evaluate what it would take for us to obtain this federal certification and accreditation. And then there was a storm supplemental appropriations bill that Congress adopted that funded the Corps for $3 million to do a core study, which led to the partnership with the Corps. And that LRC group also looked at a variety of different options. Could the port take over the drainage districts? Could the county? Could Metro? Could one of the cities? How would you structure it? And they looked at a bunch of different ways of going about that and settled on a legislative proposal, expecting it to take 2 sessions to pass, and it passed in the first session. That created ORS 550, if you'd like to look it up, and that established the new district and the mechanism for dissolving the old districts once we started the new one after that. So it was a coalition, and there's a lot of stories about what happened during that and what promises were, and I regret that I wasn't there. I came on the scene just over 2 years ago to do this job.
And I'm curious that, you know, Troutdale section of the levee has always been paid for by the people that have property in the area protected by the levee. Mm-hmm. And you said our costs are going to go down?
Your share of costs is going down. Costs overall, remember, we're at about $14.5 million in the current fiscal year, and our estimates for the first year of operations of the new district are about $16.7 million.
There's a concern too, is we're used to, you know, if Troutdale needs something built, paying for it, and then, but once it's built, that drops off. It's no longer a bill for us. But now we're being asked to pay this amount forever until the entire system is built, and it seems really unfair because a lot like Penn 1 and Penn 2, I think, are in the worst shape. I saw the projects they have compared to what we have. How are we going to make that work for Troutdale?
Well, so there's a couple of different questions that you're asking here. There's the capital program, and that has a certain source of revenue, and we haven't talked about it yet tonight, but the Urban District Board is likely to refer a general obligation bond to all the voters in the district. We expect that bond to raise something around $175 million or less to provide the local match and to pay for all the capital needs of the entire district, including the $25 million for Troutdale. And if you look at the assessed value of the district and who's going to be paying those property tax bonds, it's all the property owners in the entire district, all of urban Multnomah County inside the UGB. What you're going to see is the share that Troutdale is contributing for that capital cost is consistent with the value that's coming from the capital program. And it's a one-time expense on the capital side. On the operating side, what we've learned is that just off the floodplain, it's been very difficult for the legacy districts to generate enough operating revenue without creating real impacts to the businesses and residents of the floodplain. So the legislature gave us the authority to impose new fees on the entire district, because not just the floodplain residents benefit from our levy system, we all benefit from that levy system. So we're looking at if you took that flood safety tax and you allocated it by individual human being across the district, it would be less than 60 cents a month and less than $8 a year. And that's ongoing, but it diminishes the total contribution that Troutdale has to pay, which is why today you're at 11.1% of the total operating costs, and you're going to drop down to 7.7% in the future.
Yeah, we all know how costs can go up though, but I was curious why Wood Village isn't going to pay anything on this.
Wood Village has no property in the floodplain. But they will be paying the privilege tax or the flood safety
Don't
tax.
they benefit? from
That's
it?
why they're gonna pay, they'll pay
Okay.
there's two sources of revenue. There's the assessments on the floodplain, and there's the tax on the entire district. Wood Village, for the first time ever, will be making contributions due to the benefits they receive. They're not paying anything today, but they will pay in the future.
Because I know they drain a lot of water down towards those pump stations.
And only Portland currently pays us for that water coming in. It's the only city that covers that cost.
I'm not looking for more,
Yeah.
more options to bill us. And one other thing confused me when you were talking about, in Troutdale, 7/10 of the cost could be made up by property in the floodplain. Are you talking about in the levee protected area, that floodplain, or are you talking about somebody on Beaver Creek that has property in the
No,
floodplain?
only in the Columbia River floodplain. They're currently served by SDIC floodplains.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, there's multiple floodplains. Thank you
Yeah.
for that clarification.
Alright.
I appreciate that question. Sorry to be inaccurate. I was trying to be concise and
No.
lost some details.
I just needed to hear clarification on that. So
Thank you for the questions.
Other questions from the council?
I have one last question.
Yes, go ahead, Sandy.
Who decides what the projects are gonna be that the money's spent on? Because I could see this being a forever thing.
So you can go to the Flood Safe Columbia River website and you can see all of the projects that have been identified. We, again, did a $3 million study with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers funded by federal taxpayers to identify the weaknesses in our system. And that study resulted in a capital planning program. The legacy drainage districts have also each completed drainage master plans that identified inside the levee work that needed to be accomplished. And our legacy board members were responsible for approving those capital improvement programs. So each of the projects that would be funded is fully documented and available publicly, and it would take a vote of the board to change those. In terms of the general obligation bond, once we make a promise to voters, we'll have to be consistent with that promise, whatever was in the ballot title, and that our current urban board is working on that title now. We're also really interested in ensuring that any remaining revenue from SDIC be restricted solely for use within the boundaries of SDIC. So we're going to talk to the legislature about whether we can do that by statute. We'll also be working on budgetary mechanisms to restrict any leftover funding to ensure that those who paid for it benefit from it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you, Jim. I'll just make my report to the council on where I stand on this. I've been involved for a long time. You could probably just stay there. We might serve other
I'm at your
questions.
pleasure.
Sure. I haven't, shall we say, bored the council with a report on this whole subject for, it's been quite a few years I've been on here because it's so complicated. But I was appointed to serve on this new UFSWQD board in 2020 by the council, and prior to that, I was on the Levy Ready Columbia group that helped, I guess, lobby for formation of this district. The current district that manages the levees that protect Troutdale's north industrial area is the Sandy Drainage Improvement Company, which Tanny Stephenson is on the board. I don't know if you're the head, Tanny, but anyway, Tanny is our representative on the UFSWQD board, is not our representative. He is the representative for the Sandy Drainage Improvement Company on this new board. And I admit I was skeptical at first about enlarging the flood safety district, especially charging residents and property owners who are not in the floodplain. That's who paid for these levies all along. They seem to be the direct beneficiaries. And, but I ended up being convinced that by one of the best arguments is there's properties of regional job creating significance like PDX, the airport, and others that are benefit the region as a whole, and people who are outside the actual managed floodplain should be contributing at least some to saving those valuable properties from floods. The new district, when it was authorized by ORS 550, as Jim mentioned, passed in the legislature in 2019. And it has a fair balance of spreading the cost of the new district more widely. The capital improvements are going to be funded through general obligation bonds assessed throughout the entire district. So, and as Jim mentioned, the district is big. It's all of Multnomah County inside the UGB. So even the west side, where you can imagine that their water doesn't actually drain into this area, are going to be contributing if they vote, if the district as a whole votes for the GO bond. I don't know whether it'll pass in Troutdale, but we're likely to be voted. It's like we'll be charged for the GO bond because we're in the district. And I'm not saying that's unfair. I'm just saying that's the way it is. The board and the staff came up with this flood safety benefits tax, also called the privilege tax, to be levied throughout the entire district, including in the floodplain and outside. And exactly how it's imposed or collected has not quite been worked out, but I don't have any particular objection to that. It's going to be very small, like $1 or $2 a month on your water bill.
Likely less, but
Even less, maybe. Okay. It won't be, it's minimal. And it is for an important cause. Keep in mind, this new district is going to have greater expenses than the 4 other districts did before, because the federal rules have increased on what is required for safe levees. And we're going to have to upgrade the levees regardless of what happens. We're forced to do it by, I got the impression it was from several storms over the last 10 years have damaged levees in other parts of the country. So the Army Corps raised the standards for these levees, and the new districts also do some other things that the old districts haven't done, cultural heritage preservation and wildlife preservation and so on, that are a minor part of the district, but still they're new tasks. So it's going to cost more. That's never popular. It's not going to be popular in Troutdale, but we're all going to have to chip in a little bit. What the board and staff is proposing to fund the bulk of the operating expenses is a system of assessments that was not allowed under ORS 550. And it's, I think, the opposite of the way we should be going, and I've said that all along. Assessments on properties in the managed floodplain is the basis of this, and the district, I think, when the legislation was passed, it prohibited that form, basically ad valorem or property tax assessments, as a way of funding the district because of compression, which we've all agreed is very complicated, but it basically, it includes, the district is so big, it includes properties in Portland, Fairview, other jurisdictions that are heavily compressed. The property tax on each property is, the district is able to impose but not collect the entire assessment. Whereas Troutdale, which isn't compressed or is less compressed, will pay more than our share. And there was one sentence in Eric's staff report that I really liked on page 8 at the top. It is agreed that there is still unfair compression cost shift from Portland, Fairview, and other cities to Troutdale. And then it goes on in the first year of approximately 73,000. That's my fundamental objection. It is both obviously unfair, I think, to Troutdale to collect the taxes that way, and it shouldn't be permitted. And it wasn't permitted in the original legislation. So that's why the board is proposing to go to the legislature and propose legislation expressly permitting property taxes. Anyway, with the help of Ed Trumke, our city attorney, I submitted to the board a proposal to fund operating expenses using user fees. Those had been studied maybe a year before, and I didn't realize that they had disappeared off the radar. But that is what the original legislation allowed, user fees. And the trouble with user fees is collecting them. And you saw, Jim had a good one slide showing how, if you only collect 60% of the user fees or 80%, you're losing millions every year. Anyway, but the particular agencies that would collect user fees efficiently don't want to do it, particularly Portland. I don't know what it's called, but the Portland Stormwater Utility Agency. They're saying it's too complicated, we can't possibly do that. And I acknowledge that our staff, who is in Portland and is not in a position to push back on that. I mean, it's just, they're refusing to do it. And
We're pushing just unsuccessfully.
well, okay. Anyway,
And Gresham is in that camp.
one of the justifications that was offered by the agency, at least, I can't, it's in one of the staff reports, that if we imposed a user fee instead of property taxes subject to compression, some of those businesses and properties would have an immediate increase in how much they pay. Well, I'm sorry, that's not very convincing to me when I contend they haven't been paying their share. But anyway, shifting the compression from Portland to Troutdale is very unfair and obviously unfair. And so I'm not sure what an easy sell this is going to be at the legislature. And it's particularly so since the SDIC levies around Troutdale are in the best shape, as was acknowledged before. Anyway, I've asked the staff to study our user fee proposal, the one Ed and I submitted, and they are doing that. And at the last meeting, the representatives, we were considering whether to consider my proposal or not. And I was particularly put off by the fact that the representatives from Portland who benefit from the compression rules that make Troutdale pay more outvoted me and some others. There were some from Portland that were with me. It was a 10-6 vote of the board. And anyway, I'm continuing my work to persuade the vote to go the other way, but that's what I'm doing. I do think staff is listening, and I welcome the further studying of the proposals. The proposal Ed and I made had specific proposals for legislation that would basically force the storm district to collect a user fee and perhaps allow or force the Department of Revenue to collect an employee fee. We were trying to figure out a way to measure users that use that floodplain district to pay the fee. And it's not an easy sell. I'm having, it's a tall order, but I appreciate staff's attention to working on it. And that's where I'm coming from. I think I'm fighting the good fight for Troutdale. I don't like the way we went, and I was very disappointed that that is the way we ended up going to a system that shifts the compression costs from Portland to Troutdale, but it may end up turning out to be the only way. I can be convinced. I just am not convinced yet. I don't know if anyone on the council has questions of me.
I do.
Sandy, of course, please.
Of course, I'm sorry. So on this compression, one of my concerns is that I know we have some major expenses about to hit us with new fire and police contracts or districts. And am I understanding this compression right, that basically because Troutdale still has room to charge more in our property taxes, that's where the water district is coming in, or the levy district, and taking advantage of that? Wouldn't that hurt us down the road when we need to access some of that for our own fire and police safety?
Well, I think they're
Are those
they're
two different things?
related, but I might want some expert,
Well,
I mean,
the only, I'm sorry,
No,
the
that-
only thing that does impact potentially is one of two ways, and Mr. Trumpy can correct me, is one, if the citizens of Troutdale agree to join or form a fire district, which then becomes its own property taxing entity, that would play into our tax rate. Or second of all, if they pass a local option levy that would voluntarily increase their tax rate to pay for certain services. So it has the potential in the future if one of those two things happen.
And local option levies are compressed before the general obligation piece is. So the local option levy would suffer more than just a fire district levy.
And again, capital bonds are not subject to compression.
right,
So
the
they
general
don't-
obligation bond to pay for the infrastructure is levied throughout the district and is not subject to compression. That's why I haven't raised an objection to that.
Okay.
It's up to the voters, but, other questions?
What happens if the voters say no? Sorry.
Well, if Troutdale voters say no to the GO bond, for example, but the rest of the district outvotes us, we're gonna have to pay. It's district-wide, and most of the district is Portland. And, you know, they usually have said yes to these bonds, but there was one just lately that they turned down. I can't remember, it was something about a
Transportation
tax
bond.
on, yeah, well, no, it was a tax on housing sales to fund renters representation. That went down in flames, so I don't know. But anyway, if the district votes for the GO bond, the bond will appear on, the funding for that bond will appear on everybody's taxes, whether we're in Troutdale or not.
I do think if it doesn't pass, we would likely need to rely on either short-term financing from our partners, or we would probably need to move to the state and see if the state would issue some debt on our behalf. We've already received over $10 million from the state of Oregon for our initial capital program and matching funds for the core while we're working on the bond. But there is no ready source of over $100 million in capital for our flood safety system. It would likely mean we would have to retool our measure and go back to voters a second time after some time had passed.
And the way the bond's sold, at least to me, is, not that I'm promising to vote for it, but it's sold that there's a pot of money, 100 million, I think, from the Corps of Engineers or from FEMA or somebody, that if we can raise the matching funds, or at least a percentage of them, locally, meaning the GO bond, we get this other pot of money, which is more or less essential to making this whole thing work.
We just completed some polling, and the board members have the results of the poll. We'd be happy to share that with the entire council too. We're starting off at about 60% yes, and with a short number of arguments, we move up to a doubling of hard yes and to about 66% yes. I don't know whether it's going to pass. It's going to be hard work.
Yeah. Anyone else have a question of me?
I heard that the original amount was gonna be like 36 million, and now it's down to 16 million. Can you elaborate on that, how that cost was reduced?
That was I think the operating cost.
My recollection of events, which may be different than others, is the board provided direction to staff to bring a range of options from 25 to 35 million. We did that. We also costed what that would look like with a utility or a user fee. Heads exploded all around the region. And we went back and sharpened our pencils and came back with the $16.7 million proposal.
So what safeguards are in place to keep it at that number?
So again, in our legislative proposal for the district-wide tax, we're proposing a cap at inflation, and we can pick your favorite inflation indicator. We're open-minded about that. And then the charges on the floodplain would have more flexibility, but they don't generate very much money. So if you increase your rates on the floodplain by 10%, you're going to generate $750,000. So we're trying to constrain future costs by statute and by the purpose of the funding mechanism. We're a special district.
Yeah, area districts, because, you know, once you form that district, you're your own entity, council, mayor?
There's some pretty strict statutory limitations on what we can spend money on because of our special district nature. Again, I can't promise you that a future board won't do things you don't like, but candidly, I think for the next 10 or 15 years, we're going to be really busy just doing the really well-articulated capital program that's designed to upgrade and improve our system to get that federal standard met.
Now, the permanent board that replaces what I'm on and Tanning is on is the temporary board to sit and get the thing going. Permanent board, is that popularly elected, or does it have representatives of business?
Yeah, there are 9 members of that board, 5 of whom are elected. 4 of those, they're all elected district-wide. 4 must own property or have a business in the floodplain or be a representative of a landowner or a business owner. 1 of the popularly elected is elected district-wide, does not need that. And then there are 4 people appointed by the governor. I think I'm going to get this right. We have my back. We have the port gets a seat, flood safety expert or engineer gets a seat, an environmentalist gets a seat, and a social justice sort of person gets a seat, and the governor will be making those appointments.
So that's kind of the situation you're talking about. Troutdale is not going to be in a controlling position in this district, probably, but we'll do our best.
And again, we're trying to constrain future cost increases in statute.
I have a question, like,
Yes, go ahead. Sure.
a lot of money, a lot of numbers, compression, big words thrown around. And then the governor gets to decide, why is there not more money from the state being at least given to this project up front to get it going, to get it solidified, to get it up to snuff so we can now maintain it? I guess I just don't understand. Like you said, $10 million, that seems like nothing to the state. I mean, we've had plenty of people come in here and talk to us about, well, we're giving, hundreds of millions of dollars to the homeless, which we've seen nothing done with. And so why, with something that is like a physical entity that needs to be updated to today's standards, seems pretty cut and dry where the money would go. Why is the state not either more responsible, or why are we not asking them for more?
We've certainly asked the state, and we've been working with the legislature to keep reseeding the levy grant fund that the state created, and that's where we've received the $10 million, and we're poised to receive more. The state also used its Oregon Solutions program to host and sponsor the entire collaborative process that led to the legislation. But just like every other local government entity, they're saying the same thing that everybody else says to me, is somebody else should pay for it. And so the greatest benefit accrues to those most proximate to the system. It does create benefits more broadly than that, and I think the state's been a really good partner, but there's not a specific set of funds available at the state level. I think if we fail with the capital bond, we'll be back down at the state asking for more help. Governor Kotek has been a good partner when she was speaker. She's been supportive as governor, but the legislature's not been warm to providing state revenue to fund what they see as a local problem. The feds have a different perspective on it, and again, they're kicking in the $100 million. I don't know. I'm not.
Yeah, no, I just
I'm sorry,
like,
don't have a clear
I just wanted to
answer
like
for
say it
you.
out loud. I don't know. I mean, I realize it just seems like all this is with the compression. It's hard to grasp my head, but but we pay more. Is again not fair, which is what you're saying. It should just be spread evenly between each person that has a benefit to it. And it's just an increased cost. Nobody wants to pay more, but I guess it's just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
I do think it's important to consider that the compression impact has been reduced by well more than half from today, and that the additional costs aren't contributing to any additional compression because we found a different funding source that our partners are willing to accept probably. So we made a big dent in it. And as I said, we hope that we can make legislative changes that over time will allow us to slowly decrease that portion of our revenue that comes from assessment and shift it to a non-compressed source. And I think we'll be successful.
Is that part of your job or the board's job, whoever that, to go and talk to the state to get more money, to get more funding, to offset the cost to the people?
We're down there regularly.
Okay.
We have a paid lobbyist who's constantly looking for funding from the state. Yeah, so we're doing everything we can to keep that faucet running. The levy grant fund had a restriction on the percentage that could be used in urban areas, and we got every dollar. So I'll just say we're killing it on the levy grant fund. I think last, I would like to tell you that Councilor Rittman's actions have resulted in a big decrease in the compression impact. So he deserves a lot of credit from taking it to 1.5 million to significantly less and moving Troutdale's unfairness down to, like I said, somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000, which
Why do
is
I keep
unfair.
wanting it to be zero? But
You know,
but I appreciate that.
I wish I could get you there. Like, I told Ed, if he could come up with a revenue mechanism, I'd wash his car and buy him dinner, and I'm still, that offer stands because it would solve all my problems. I've been unsuccessful in getting our partners to agree with that approach in the current economic and political climate. When I look to the city of Portland, and I don't know how much you guys pay attention, but they're in the middle of kind of a lot of things right now. And so they're a little preoccupied with a major reorganization. So asking their utility service provider to engage in a very expensive, complex, likely flawed system is bad timing. And Gresham is in the same boat. So Gresham was right there with us, and those two combined would collect more than 90% of the revenue, and they both told me no. And the alternatives available to us would cost Troutdale more. I regret I can't solve your very principled problem with compression. Can't. And I don't think you can either in the next year, but I think over the next decade, we're going to kill it off and we're going to make it right.
Well, there's one other party that might want to comment or make a report. Tanny, do you want to say anything on behalf of SDIC?
I had one quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I heard that the largest source of income for the state of Oregon is their property along the Columbia River and Port.
I don't know the answer.
I'm pretty sure I learned that at the League of Oregon Cities. So it seems like, Councilor One's questions make a lot of sense, that they should be paying a lot more than $10 million. They're protecting their biggest income source in the state, the entire state. Sorry,
Oh,
I
you're
had to get
fine.
that one in.
Good evening, Council President Rittma and Councilors Tanny Staffinson, and I serve on the Sandy Drainage Improvement Company's Board of Directors. I've been on there since about 2015. And this has been discussed quite a bit, gone back and forth, ebbed and flowed. And as you know, we've been in here for quite a few meetings discussing this direction, things of that nature. Just to remind you that you guys are the map holder and we work for you. And so SDIC isn't going to do something contrary to a position that the city has. We wouldn't do that. We're going to work within the guidelines that you give us. And hopefully that will be the same thing for the urban district, because they would be working for you as well in their capacity. There were some things, that we were looking for in particular. I'll just go into them. We were told that we wouldn't have assessments anymore. That hasn't worked out. There's been some other things that we've been trying to work through, but there have been some challenges. And at the end of the day, I know it's been said it's going to cost more. Yeah, you're going down in your percentage, but it's a bigger cookie. And it's just costing more, and everybody's going to pay more. But I do think that we are trying diligently as SDIC and as Troutdale to work through and make sure that it's a fair split. Because if you look at now, we're projected the year one increases. MCDD is going to go up about 7%, Pen 1 is going to go up about 13%, Pen 2 is going to go up about 5%, SDIC is going to go up almost 14%. And those are things that we're trying to work through, we're trying to figure out, we're trying to come up with the best solution possible for everybody. But we've got to do it the right way, and it's got to make sense for everybody. And we've had a lot of things that we've had to go through, but I think I still believe in being true to your values and being true to what we promise people as much as we possibly can, and that's delivering on those things, delivering on something as economically as we can that's going to do the right things. There's granted a couple things. There's been some issues with the levies. I would agree. I also would agree with you, Councilor White, that this end is newer and it's in better shape. There were some projects that are on there now that weren't even projects when the Corps started looking at this. And, you know, you can look at it, you can say, yeah, we have some issues here, and we do. But when you look at just for me personally, when you look at the Penn 1 railroad levy, it's been that way for 70 years. I kind of ask why that wasn't dealt with a long time ago. But 1996, I think that's what the slide was from, was 96, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, when half the pump station was literally underwater. Somebody went in there with hip waders on to flip the 440 power on the pump.
That wasn't a happy day for that staff person.
They used a long pole and stuff. But yeah, I got
I hope so.
But there's a couple of things, you know, SDIC, we're working to make sure that the landowners are taken care of, the city's taken care of. And there's a few things along with what Councilor Rittmer's brought up, you know, that we're concerned about. One is in the statute, it says that the new district has to have a mechanism for operating and for capital, okay, before dissolution can happen. And capital is a real key because capital is only addressed in the bond. The money that we're paying for fees now, some of that goes to capital. Very little of that's going to go to capital in the future. Most of the capital is going to get done with the bond. And if the bond doesn't pass, where does that leave people? So that's something that we're trying to get answered. And because it's like, I look at it and it's like, well, you don't really want to hand everything over until you know that it's all going to be done and done correctly. So those are questions we're still trying to get answered. And we're also working through some issues because when you do this changeover, the SDIC would still be collecting assessments on their behalf and turning them over to the new district. And that could potentially put SDIC and its members in legal issues. Violation of their articles of incorporation, their charter, their bylaws, and I won't go into those things, but we're working through those with legal counsel to make sure that those get addressed. And probably a fundamental concern that I know Councilor Rittmer has, he mentioned it, and I have, and I don't think there's any way to fix it. Yes, Portland has the lion's share of this, but Portland also outvotes you. We've seen that recently. And that was a little hard. That was one of the reasons I talked to Dave and said we should probably go talk to the Troutdale Council, because 3 of the 4 drainage districts voted against something and it still passed. And from that standpoint, I just wish that, I guess we had a little more balance in our representation. Portland's bigger, I understand that, but it's kind of like you're the little kid over here, you just, you know, kind of do your own thing.
I agree with that. You know, the SDIC took care of it for how many years, Kenny, without going to the public for any money at all?
Well, very long time, and if you look back, you know, we are going to one district, which is going to have benefits, because there was a time when SDIC wasn't in the best financial position it could ever be in. Matter of fact, we had to up our rates practically 50% for a couple of years in a row to get ourselves where we needed to go. But if you remember when we built the weir, which was a significant thing because it allowed Amazon to come in and some other things to develop. But I felt like the only thing we didn't do was open a lemonade stand, because we were in here hitting you guys up for money, hitting the county up for money, hitting the other drainage districts up for money, but they said no. But it all worked out and we got our debts paid off, and you know, we're in a better place. But it just kind of tells you how it all works out when it needs to, and when you have the right partners. And the city's been a phenomenal partner all along.
So what can we do?
I think, you know, help from you guys would be clear direction. And us doing regular reports, I guess that's what I would say at this point, because things are moving fairly quickly. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, Dave.
Yes. We do. I agree.
But I think that would be the big thing, and understanding what it is you would like to see from us. I'm working off of the things, that were agreed to back when. Some of them can happen, some of them can't. But, I'm always like, well, we kind of promised that, so we're gonna try and deliver it as much as we possibly can. Does that answer your question, kind of, sort of?
Yep.
Okay.
Other questions of Tanny? All right, well, thank you, Tanny. I think I will invite public comment on this matter. If, take a seat and we'll see if anyone wants to comment. Anyone in the room care to make a public statement about the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District? How about out in Zoom? Any questions, comments? All right, well, not seeing any. Thank you, Jim. And I did talk to Reed after you talked to him, so just so you know.
More to come.
More to come, yes, and I appreciate that very much. So,
Thanks for this update and getting.
Now that it'll be easier topic, dogs and parks.
yeah, right. We'll see about that. Okay, moving on to an ordinance introduction. This is an ordinance amending Troutdale Municipal Code, Chapter 13.20 to allow dogs in city parks. Travis.
Is this mic good here, Ray?
Yes.
Or these mics, okay.
Yeah,
Good
that's a
evening, Council President.
directional, so be fairly close to direct. You're good.
Good evening, Council President Rittman, Mayor, members of council. I'm Travis Sultan. I'm your Public Works Director and Chief Engineer. With me tonight is Jonah Jacobson, our fairly new Park Superintendent, who I think you met back in May, but I just wanted to reintroduce him quickly. We certainly miss our near and dear friend and colleague, Tim Siri, who's retired. But Jonah's been doing a great job taking over for him, and we're very happy to have him, and I'm glad to have him here with me tonight. I'm not going to be talking tonight about millions and millions of dollars, thankfully. We'll be talking about something a little less impactful on the money side of things, but probably impactful on some people's opinions about animals and how they fit into our daily lives here in Troutdale. First thing I want to say is this is an ordinance introduction, so we're not voting on anything tonight. This is just going to be the introduction and the first public hearing on it. As an ordinance, we will bring it back to you a second time. We expect at the next meeting. So just bear that in mind as we go through things here. So what we are talking about is dogs in city parks. And I guess I want to just quickly preface with a quick technicality. We're talking about dogs in city parks, but strictly speaking, we are talking about domestic animals in city parks. So in case the question should come up, yes, this also would apply to walking your cat in a city park or your iguana in a city park, as long as it's an animal that's allowed to be out in public under the Animal Services Code. But I think, 99.9% of the animals we're going to be talking about in practical matters are dogs. So I've covered a lot of this in my staff report, so I'm just going to summarize it for you, and then we'll be happy to take questions. And Jonah's here to help answer any questions from his perspective as a park superintendent. Right now, the Troutdale Municipal Code does prohibit dogs on or off leash in all city parks and greenways. However, in recent times, the city's sort of relaxed its approach to that for a few reasons. One is based on I think partly on the fact that if you've been to any city parks lately, there's a whole bunch of dogs there. And what we find is that people really want this. They want to do it. They're going to do it. As a practical matter, it's not something that we can really strictly enforce all that well. So we just really only enforce when it's a problem presently. Also, our prior park superintendent, based on some feedback he received from the public and I think some discussions with the PAC, sort of launched a little quiet pilot project to start relaxing the policy in some parks just to see how it went. We were certainly aware in Public Works of the concerns that led to dogs being banned from city parks many years ago. A lot of that to do with sanitation and just people not really being responsible with their pets in the parks. So I think Tim kind of wanted to find out, well, you know, if we did allow dogs, would we really have all these problems that we all fear? And so he took a few signs down in a few places and, you know, sort of relaxed the attitude towards in some places, and recognizing the reality that the dogs are there and we do want people to pick up after them. They put up dog waste stations in many parks and around the entrances to many greenways. So you have seen that relaxation actually going on already. But what really brings this to the fore is the process that we all went through with the Parks Master Plan. And there was substantial public outreach conducted for that Parks Master Plan, and a really big aim. And a lot of the time spent in developing that Parks Master Plan was talking to the community in various ways to determine what does the community want from its park system. I mean, that's what the Parks Master Plan should be about, right? Is trying to serve the needs of the public and what they want to see in their park system. After all, it's their park system. And the overall top response that we got for what people want to see is parks that allow dogs. There are lots of things they want to see, and there was nothing that was, you know, 100% support. But when you look at the responses, the one that got the most support was allowing dogs in parks. So with that in mind, the adoption of the Parks Master Plan, looking at the responses we got to the surveys and other public outreach efforts, considering the relaxation that we've seen, the people that are sort of voting with their leashes by taking their dogs to the parks, regardless of what the ordinance says. In response to all that, we staff worked with the PAC to draft a ordinance that would change that policy formally and allow dogs in most city parks. We are opening an off-leash dog park. I just want to mention that briefly. We have the grand opening coming on October
22nd.
22nd. Love to see you all there. Love to see your dogs, preferably in costume. There is a costume contest. But you know, the off-leash dog park is a great addition. It's something a lot of people want and need, but it doesn't serve, you know, really doesn't fully respond to what people were asking for in the Parks Master Plan. They want to be able to do, you know, daily excursions with their dogs into the parks, exercise, play, things like that in our city parks. So as I said, we worked with the PAC to draft this ordinance that would allow that. The ordinance includes not only a framework for allowing dogs in parks, it includes some basic rules about sort of most essential elements of rules for dogs in parks. It also empowers staff to promulgate other reasonable and customary rules about how you should conduct yourself with your pet in the park. Includes some specific prohibitions because there are certain areas in parks that we know, you know, dogs probably shouldn't be in. Probably shouldn't have them in Imagination Station. We know they can't be too close to the Beaver Creek or on the Glen Autumn Park Beach. Certain places like that. Sports fields, you know, we probably don't want them running around on sports fields on most occasions if people might not pick up the waste and things like that. Sports courts. So there are some specific prohibitions in there to address the most universal things that where we would want to have restrictions. But as I said, of course, it does also empower the director, which is me, certainly in conjunction with in consultation with the PAC and city manager Jonah, to promulgate other rules as we might find are needed to make sure that everyone conducts themselves properly and handles their animals properly. There's a couple other things you'll see in the draft ordinance. So we took this opportunity to correct or enhance, might be a better word. Number one, you might notice that we changed the definition of director because parks is now under public works. So there was a sort of an antiquated reference there to the director being community development, because at the time that ordinance was drafted, parks was part of community development. So that was sort of a simple housekeeping functional change. We also addressed a couple of things in the enforcement provision. Right now, the enforcement tool for violations of parks rules is simply to kick people out, which is great, but if they come back, okay, now what do we do? Well, we can come out again. Okay, well, that's not, they can just keep coming back. And if we're not there every time they come back to kick them out, that's not really a very good enforcement tool. So we did add, very similar to most of our other ordinances and rules, we have now a progressive fine system if you violate those exclusion orders, and that was really just to make the exclusion orders stick if we ever needed to use them. The other one that we changed, or thing we added, is recognizing that we're now, if we were to now allow dogs in parks, now you might have a dog in a park and say off leash, which would be a violation. Okay, we looked at the enforcement provisions. One of the enforcement tools that grants in there is seizure of property. Now, I think when that was drafted, it was thinking, if you're playing lawn darts in the park, that would be prohibited. We're going to take away your lawn darts, but pets are a whole different class of property. These are sentient living things. They are things that people have extremely powerful emotional attachments to, much more so than their Frisbee or something like that might get taken away. So we really felt that, we didn't want to give ourselves, frankly, the ability to just take someone's pet away over, some minor parks violation that felt, overreaching, I guess, in government authority. So we did put an exclusion, add an exclusion to that seizure of property, existing seizure of property language that basically says, we can't take away your pet just for failing to pick up their poop, essentially something like that. The police can still seize an animal under any of the existing rules of the Multnomah County Animal Services Code or state law, which provide all of the appropriate situations in which it would really be warranted to take away someone's beloved pet. The PAC met about this or talked about this at 3 of their meetings over the last few months. So there's lots of discussion about it, lots of opportunity for public comment, a lot of good discussion amongst the Parks Advisory Committee. And conclusion of that, they ultimately recommended this ordinance forward as you see it now for your consideration and adoption. With that, I will conclude my staff report. Be happy to answer any questions y'all folks have. And of course, Jonah's here to give the boots on the ground perspective to what we're seeing out there with dogs in the parks.
Thank you. Questions from the council?
So why does it have to be all the way one way or all the way the other way? You said it was the majority, but obviously a controversial subject. Why couldn't we just make it certain parks are dog friendly, certain parks are for those people that don't want to be around dogs or have their own children or whatever, not around dogs? Why couldn't we designate certain parks one way and certain parks another way?
Under this ordinance, we can. So this ordinance does, I didn't really talk about that part, but one of the other provisions is, it does provide some specific areas and classes of areas and parks. I mentioned playgrounds, things like that, where they are outright excluded by this ordinance. But it also allows staff to designate an entire park, or certain areas of a park as exclusionary areas. So that gives us city flexibility to designate certain parks no dogs, and some parks dogs allowed. The ordinance says, basically provides generally dogs are allowed in parks, but it has a provision that says, but we can designate certain parks or certain just portions of parks where dogs are excluded.
So listed in the check is council would approve or deny to have dogs there, but staff would have the ultimate say in what parks and what portions of parks would allow dogs.
We would have the administrative ability to do that, but of course we answer to you. So I mean, the Parks Advisory Committee.
And then my next comment would be, and I don't know if even you can answer because I don't believe you can, is we've already discussed how we already have a problem with dogs being in parks that are not allowed and no way to enforce them. Now, what makes you think that our ability to enforce the new rules that are going to be there if we allow dogs in is going to get any better than enforcing the dogs staying out that we currently can't enforce?
I would agree with you that this ordinance does not enhance the Parks Division of Public Works' ability to take enforcement actions with the ordinance as it is, or the ordinance amendment as it's proposed right now. What this does do is, I believe, strike a reasonable compromise with members of the community who are already doing this. The outright prohibition of dogs from city parks in the ordinance as it is right now is essentially, unless we would like to have a discussion about funding increased enforcement staff for the Parks Division. The ordinance as it is right now is a strongly worded paper tiger that people are ignoring. In my mind, given that the community stated quite clearly in the surveys conducted in the Parks Advisory Committee process that this is something that they would like to see happen in their parks, I believe that what this ordinance does is provide a reasonable compromise that allows people to bring well-behaved leash dogs to their parks. In some ways, by providing that compromise, it gives people an outlet for walking their dogs that will be a reasonable alternative to walking your dog, say, on the soccer field or on a playground. Parks workers can approach somebody in that case and say, you're allowed to have your dog in all of the park, but not right here. And so we'd appreciate it if you would adhere to those rules. That being said, though, this ordinance does not provide for increased enforcement resources, and therefore I see that as a moot point whether we change the ordinance or not. It's a separate discussion, I think, the ability of our current staff to enforce dogs in parks or any other issue for that matter.
If I can interject in those questions, Councilor Wittrin, there's probably three issues I want to address that have been brought up to add some more insight. Number one was, as you asked, well, why didn't you just pick certain parks that you allow dogs in or not? Number one, that as a starter begins a confusion for the citizens, because they hear that, oh, now you can have dogs in parks, and they don't read the fine print, and they start going, they don't know which ones they can or can, they may get confused on it. Second of all, how do you pick and choose which parks they can come into or not? Somebody says, I live near Whedon Park, I want to take my dog down there, but you pick that one as not to have dogs in. Why did you pick that one not to, but Columbia, yes? And so if you pick and choose some of them, I think you add to the confusion of our citizens. And I think the Parks Advisory Committee thought it was better, let's just have a blanket rule for all the parks, and so the same rules applies to every park and it's easier to enforce. Now, as Travis alluded to, it's also interesting, if you read the new ordinance carefully, it allows a fair amount of leeway by staff to tighten the rules, not loosen the rules, which is probably a good thing because this is a new thing. And if you look at the ordinance, and I'm looking at page number, in the red line version of the ordinance, which is on your exhibit number 5, down on the third sheet of paper, it says that the director may prohibit dogs or other domestic animals in certain parks or designated areas in addition to those provided above. We can post that. So we can add to the list of excluded parks, the staff can, and this would generally be if there's a problem. Oh, crud, this is a bad thing going on, we can make no dogs in these certain parks. Number 2, let me finish this, Councilor White, then I'll get to your question. Number 2, it says the director may establish reasonable and appropriate rules of etiquette, safety, and sanitation. So we have the ability to put more rules to take care of concerned issues. Some might say, well, dogs bark all the time, or they're too loud in this park. Well, we can pass administratively rules that say, if a dog parks for more than X amount of time or becomes a nuisance, then we can ban that person. So we have the ability to tighten these rules. The third thing you see at the bottom of that page is that we've, in this ordinance, brought into it all the other Multnomah County rules that govern dogs in parks. And Multnomah County rules also have a specific provision, as I bring it up here, that states that it's unlawful to permit any animal like an iguana or a dog, I assume, any animal unreasonably to cause annoyance, alarm, or noise disturbance to any person or neighborhood by barking, whining, screeching, howling, braying, and other like sounds. And so by incorporating that into the ordinance itself, we do have the ability to tighten down if there becomes a problem. But because it is a new thing, it kind of creates a problem. So that's what I like what Parks Advisory Committee came up with and what staff came up with, is it does allow for us to tighten things down if we see a problem, or even close some parks so they become a problem. And thirdly, the last thing on enforcement, The one thing that I have learned, I've talked to the last 2 beach deputies that we have had, so I've talked to actually Multnomah County Sheriff's deputies. They say it will be easier to enforce this type of ordinance than what we have now. Because now you come to a park and you've got 27 people that have brought their family and their dogs into the park. They're gonna have to go out there and kick all 27 of these families out of the park, and most of them are residents of Troutdale, and they're not gonna be happy. It's really hard to enforce that type of blanket ban when they become such a prevalent thing that families like to bring dogs. And so by allowing just restrictions, it's easier to go, what I hear from the deputies, it's easier for us to go to this family and say, hey, that dog needs to be on a leash. That dog needs to be 6 feet farther away from X. Your dog is within 100 feet of the river, you gotta pull it back. It is easier to enforce to our citizens, which we presumably will be taking advantage of this, if we're just telling them not get them out of here, but you have to do this, this, and this if you're gonna stay in the park. So it does make it easier to enforce according to law enforcement. They would rather have this type of ordinance than we had before. So I just wanted to, listening to all the things that happened, I just wanted to add some more context that I've heard in regards to the ordinance. So hopefully that answers some of your questions, Councilor Whitron. And I know Councilor White had another question too.
Just
but-
to finish mine, and I'll pass on, is I just hope we don't segregate the people that don't want to be around dogs, because we're sending the message, the people that own dogs in Troutdale are gonna be more important than the people that don't. I personally would not want to bring my grandchildren around larger German Shepherds, pit bulls, stuff like that. You know, they come walking down the street, I grab my wife, I move her to the other side of me, grab my grandkids, move them to the other side. Whether or not, I'm just not a dog person, you're going to segregate some people because you're gonna say, hey, dogs are gonna be in front of them. I'm not gonna take my grandkids to the park. So,
Certainly, and if you, in my staff report, I did speak to the fact that we have to be conscious and compassionate to the fact that some people don't want to be around dogs for whatever reason. They don't like them, they fear them, whatever it may be. And we even included a couple provisions in the ordinance to address that, specifically saying that if someone indicates that they don't want their dog near you, then you have to keep a certain distance away from them.
And I want you to know, just for you, I'm sure we wrote this in number K, which is a person shall not attack, menace, or harass the handler nor their dog unless that dog and handler are outside of compliance. So you're allowed under the ordinance to harass, attack, and annoy a dog owner who is violating these rules. Councilor Whitron. So not that I'm encouraging that behavior, but that is an exception. If somebody's violating the rules of their dog, the ordinance allows people to say, knock it off.
raise that.
Yeah.
Of course, my comment is that isn't the point.
No.
The point is, Jordan doesn't want to take his granddaughter to a park with big dogs in it, and he's not going to go confront the guy if the dog is misbehaving.
The statute does, remember, they have to be leashed. They cannot be allowed within 6 feet of anybody else. And there are other certain, they have to be, can't be closer than 25 feet to imagination station or, courts. I mean, there are some limitations about keeping the dogs under control and away from people.
Goes back to my point.
Yeah.
We can't enforce now, so I don't know, I don't see where it's gonna get any better, but
I'm
I'm done, and
since I have the luxury of being in charge here, I'm just going to make one comment. I'm going to make one comment. I do have other comments, but I'll save them for later. But why don't we try the off-leash dog park idea for starting on the 22nd? That's something we agreed to. Let's just try that and not go whole hog like this. That's my thought.
Well, I guess that's certainly your prerogative, Council President.
Well, that's the way I'm thinking about it.
I guess the question you have to ask yourself is that what people ask for during the Parks Master Plan process?
The dog owners, 37% of the respondents to the surveys wanted dogs. That's not a majority. And others had other ideas what they wanted in parks. Dog owners are very, loyal to dogs. I used to be a dog owner, and I love dogs. But anyway, I don't buy that represents overwhelming demand by the public. If it was 75%, maybe I would. But both of them were 37%. That happened to be their first choice on a list, obviously, of the survey. So anyway, excuse me, I've gone too long. Glenn, you have something.
But just understand, from a law enforcement's perspective, outright bans are harder for law enforcement to enforce than having restrictions.
Are the rules being enforced now?
I can speak to that. I'm not a law enforcement officer, but I spend a lot of time in Troutdale parks. And it is a lot easier for me to approach somebody and say, excuse me, sir or ma'am, I need you to put your dog on a leash. You can't be throwing the ball for your dog. There are young children in the park, there are elderly people, and you can't have your dog off leash. If I tell somebody, you need to get your dog out of here, the response is generally much more resistant and non-compliant, but or at least full of complaints. So people generally, when I ask them to put their dog on a leash, say, "Oh, absolutely, no problem," and continue their walk. And so that, in my experience, echoes what Ray is saying, that he's heard from actual law enforcement.
And I run through our parks fairly often, and nothing, excuse the word, pisses me off more than people who allow their dog to run around off leash. They go running up to me and I tell them, I don't know your dog. It may be the nicest thing in the world and never bite anybody, but I don't know that. Keep it on a leash. And I will yell at people, keep it on a leash, for those reasons, because it is not fair for families like Councilor Wittren's who don't necessarily want to be around dogs to let any dog off leash.
Yeah, I guess I would say, I don't want to use a bad pun. Staff doesn't really have a dog in this fight.
Oh, you just waited all night for that line, didn't
We
you?
brought this forward, obviously, because we're trying to be responsive to what we heard in the Parks Master Plan process and recognize what's going on in the parks. If the council feels that not allowing dogs would be in keeping with what the community expressed during the Parks Master Plan process, obviously, that's what y'all are here for, right? Is to make those determinations. We in the Parks Advisory Committee brought this forward because it was our sense that that's what people were asking for in the Parks Master Plan. Nothing in the Parks Master Plan got, a majority vote for it, because there were lots of choices. So by that logic, we wouldn't execute anything in the Parks Master Plan.
What was the Parks Advisory Committee's vote on this proposal? Because this came from citizens themselves, from the Parks Advisory, and this was not necessarily staff generated.
In the 3 months that the Parks Advisory Committee discussed this issue, and the proposed amendments to the ordinance, I will say that first of all, their opinions were not unanimous on one side of the issue or the other. I would say that without actually doing the statistics on it, I would say that their opinions on this matter were pretty close to a representative sample of the community. There were people who were in strong support of it. There were people who were strongly against it, and there were people who were, somewhat indifferent. And so, and in the course of a 3-month-long discussion, they approved this draft ordinance, and only one member of the committee voted no. So that is where they stood in the end.
All right, well, I assume you guys were selling it to them like you are to us tonight.
No, sir.
Staff, and they
Councilor Rittman, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I brought forward an ordinance that I think is responsive to what the Parks Master Plan.
Just an observation.
And I'm happy to not bring this back a second reading if that's the council's desire.
Well, I think the advocacy is because of the energy that the citizens have already put into this issue, and I think staff feels an obligation to put forth with as much evidence as they can to support the Parks Advisory Committee. So if you're seeing a advocacy for it, it's because it's supporting the Parks Advisory Committee, because it came out of them and it was approved by them by a 7-to-1 vote. So.
Okay, Glenn, I've been putting dogs.
It seems like, you really want this, but, I wouldn't have voted for a dog park if I'd known we were gonna do something like this. And if you want to destroy somebody's quality of life, just have barking dogs every day that they can hear in their own personal space, in their house or their yard. And, I think, as I kept questioning, I noticed the dog signs went, no dogs allowed, and our park went away. And then we have the dog bags to pick up after your dog. And I questioned stuff, I never got a straight answer. And I talked to the parks people, and they said, well, council already approved it because of the mayor's, what's it called, it's in here, proclamation.
Proclamation, yeah.
And we questioned that, the council stopped that from, we altered it. So I think there's some, and you've already said that we can't enforce it. Well, why do we take the signs down and stuff? We've lost a lot of yardage. I think you would need a dog catcher in each of our 22 parks to enforce these rules. You know, I look at Glen Auto Park, so they could bring a dog on a leash to a park, but they can't walk within 100 feet of the ordinary high water mark, and they can't be within 25 feet of the playground equipment, and they can't be within 6 feet of another person. We're talking about something that's impossible when bigger things aren't being enforced, like fires on the beach, alcohol, marijuana, glass containers, and even overnight camping. So we're somehow magically going to be able to enforce this dog thing. I would rather see us, if dogs are that popular, then we need to find more suitable places where there isn't neighbors, and put the dog parks there. I'd be much more willing to do that. Because I love dogs, but I'll admit it, I've been around dogs my whole life. I like my dog better than I like other people's dogs. And you know why? It's because that dog's gonna protect their family and the people they're familiar with. And dogs get more protective when their master's with them, because they feel like they got backup. So it's not a good situation to invite them into all of our parks. And Glen Auto's a great example, that's one I live by. Across the street is Lewis and Clark Park, and you're allowed to take your dog to that side or that side of the river, and people do it all the time. And it's also right next to the Delta, which has probably the biggest dog park in this entire area. And then on the other hand, you've got Glen Auto Park, where people are doing funerals and weddings and barbecues and outdoor events, and we do art festivals. We utilize that park for the entire community, not just the dog folks. And I think, Jonah, you said that dogs would not, don't worry, last time when we met you the first time, and you said, don't worry, for environmental reasons, dogs won't be allowed in Glen Auto Park.
I said on the beach at Glen Auto Park.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood you then. And, the lifeguards, their rules are if a dog's in the water, they have to respond, they have to go out there, because having a dog in the water creates an added danger for anyone swimming, because if the dog's tired, he's gonna try to rest on a kid or the nearest object to him.
And that's why that's banned under the ordinance for this big folks.
Ray, you can't even enforce any of the things I just mentioned.
Well, I
And
think.
you just removed the police officer out of there, you reduced his hours on your own.
I think we're not doing a very good job of explaining the enforcement issue, because every person who tries to enforce dog park ordinances will tell you this is easier to enforce than a total ban, because a total ban creates a lot more work and a lot more conflict situations to try to enforce. And so, as Jonah did a great job of explaining, it's much more easier for our law enforcement officers and our park people to go to people and say, you got to have it on a leash. That goes down a lot easier than you and your family have to leave the park because you have a dog here. It is much easier, and that's what the deputies tell me too. They would rather enforce this than the other one. It is easier for them. It is not a manpower issue. It is about the impact on those that you're trying to enforce it. So this is a council decision. You have a Parks Advisory recommendation 7-1 that they think this should be the law of Troutdale. If the council by majority says, no, we still want to keep all dogs banned from our parks, that's your call, and we will enforce it. And if there's a problem because it's not being enforced and there's a problem, we'll do what we can to up the enforcement. And it's your call. What message? I think the only reason the declaration from the mayor is there is because do you want our ordinances to be friendly to people with animals or not? And it's your call. And that's how you're gonna be judged. Just want you to think about that. That's what your citizens will judge this action by. And if a majority don't care or are not in support of it, then great. But that's what the Parks Advisory Committee was trying to do, strike a balance.
Well, I
Speaking
think
of
they were, Ray, they were trying to say, hey, we don't have to decide this, let's kick it up to the council, because it's a tough call, and it is a tough call. And I can read it that way, and I think it's fair to read it that way. I'm not saying I'm right, but they might have just said, okay, we'll let the council decide. And so they voted to refer it, but that doesn't mean we have to do it. I'd like to follow their advice, but I'm thinking about it. So when did you come?
Yeah, I'd love to say something. I'm just the exact opposite of you guys, but this is.
I didn't hear you.
Counselor Glantz has been waiting.
I'm
Go ahead,
sorry.
Sandy,
Well,
I can wait.
Yeah, Sandy, your turn.
Thank you. I have a bunch of stuff on here. Let me lower this. It's automatically lowering it because it's been up too long. A couple things. I listened in on all those Parks Advisory meetings when they talked about all this. And the Parks Advisory group, for the most part, is very pro dogs. I mean, I'm not allowed to say anything. I can only listen. I personally am not, having been on multiple occasions at parks knocked over by dogs that break loose of their leashes because there's either a dog walker that's got too many dogs, or the person was not, didn't think anybody else was around. They let the dog go. Not a big fan. And then I understand, I don't see where the compromise is on this. I heard that earlier, that this is supposedly a compromise. And I don't think that that is any kind of compromise for people who don't want to have dogs in the park. I would much rather we looked at this and said, which parks can we let dogs in? Something like the one on the backside of Mountain Community College. There's no residents. It's wide open. Doesn't matter if the dog poops. It's, all pretty wild. Be a great place to put them. I don't think we need to open up all our parks to dogs. And I think that if people are already taking dogs where they're not supposed to go, and we suddenly say dogs are fine, I think there's going to be a lot more dogs not on leashes. I think it's going to get even worse. That was mine. Thanks.
All right.
So I think I hear you're saying about having rules and having guidelines around around having a dog in a park, right? So it needs to be on a leash. I would hope that a leash is described within the rules, like what do you guys consider a leash, etc. I think that there is always going to be bad apples that ruin anything for everything, right? So you have people that ruin camping in certain places for other people, okay? If I am in my driveway and a person's walking by, I can say the same thing. And Jordan says, I don't like the way that they look or whatever, so I move everybody up the driveway and let them just walk by. Does that mean that they shouldn't be able to walk by my house? Does that mean, I'm going on the other thing is if I don't like kids at parks, they're loud, they're obnoxious, and I don't want them there. Does that mean that they shouldn't be there? No. I mean, that seems ridiculous to say that out loud, but I've met multiple people at the park that I walk around Sunrise with my dog all the time. And yes, I just admitted to probably something I shouldn't be doing, but met multiple people around there that they're older, they're elderly, they walk their dogs around, they're very nice, but that they don't have kids anymore. This is their daily out. This is what they go and do. They walk their dog around the park, they get their exercise, they're bonding with their animal, they're meeting other people around. That's what I see when I'm out. I don't see people being, every once in a while you there's one lady, her dog's too big for her, and so it sees my dog, and every time her dog runs, and if she doesn't let it go, it would pull her over. But the dog's very nice, and we've met multiple times. But that could be startling, and I understand that, and we've talked about it, and she gets it. But to say, and also to just specifically say these parks you can take your dog to, there's parks strategically placed around our entire city, Why is that? It's because citizens live in different parts of the city. You know, if I live in Sandy Palisades, I don't want to have to walk or drive all the way up to Columbia Park to just go and walk my dog in a grassy setting. Like, I should be able to go to those two parks there. There's a path I can walk around. I can walk around the neighborhood. Like, that's where people chose to live. That's where they're choosing to settle down. And so whether or not, like, I like dogs, I happen to like dogs. I think there's certain dogs that that give off, have a bad stereotype, sure, but you know, I really hesitate to let a few ruin it for the majority. And the majority is that people probably enjoy walking their dogs out and about in the nature. We have parks, and no matter what we do, no matter in life, you're gonna have a few bad people that ruin things, for like people speed, right? People run into people hit cars because they weren't paying attention. They were on their cell phone, I don't want to outlaw these things. I think that the pros outweigh the cons in terms of letting people be with their animals. And I'm gonna assume, and if that gets me in trouble, like, I'm gonna assume that people are gonna be responsible about that. So I do hear what you guys are saying, and like I heard Sandy, if a dog came and like knocked me over multiple times, yeah, I'd probably be pissed and I'd probably hate dogs and I'd think it would be annoying. But the majority of the time, I don't think those things happen. And so I just wanted to make sure and say my piece.
Thank you.
But yeah.
Anyone else on the council?
I have one quick thing to add.
Sure.
I appreciate that we had the survey. And for the most part, it's a pretty valid survey. Generally in the Portland Metro, if you have at least 300 responses, it's considered a valid survey. But when I broke that out, looking, because it was, showing like neighborhoods, for Sweetbriar, where I am, there were a total of 19 respondents, and only 6 of them said they wanted, some kind of more dog parks. And what's kind of interesting to that is we only have a 1/4 acre park in the Sweetbriar area, and it's right next to a school. And you can't go there during school hours, it's blocked. So I don't really see this as, I'm sure they would like to be able to go someplace, like have a dog park and be able to be off leash and have more parks that, they can go to. Portland, I know a lot of people at work that live in Portland and go out to 1,000 Acres to take their dogs. That's a pretty popular destination. I don't think it's unreasonable that we have designated dog parks. Thank you.
I don't think that it's off leash areas specifically. I want to take my dog on the leash and we want to go out on a walk. I want to walk to the park because it's nice. And so I'm not reading into it that I need specifically a lot of parks to take my off leash dog to. Like, that's not, I don't think the main point, but.
Councilor Whitman.
Councilor One said, I believe it was most of the time, or this will happen the majority of the time, that everything will be fine. I think a small child being bit by a dog once could permanently change the life of a child, and that's the way I look at it. And for somebody with a dog my option is either to go to a park with a dog and risk that, or because you have a dog and that's your lifestyle and you're forcing that on me, or I choose not to go because I have no other option in my city. I still think, as Sandy said, there's a compromise here somewhere to have an option not to be around a dog. Which my 2 cents.
Well, thanks. I still, my position is we've got, another 10 days opening up our off-leash dog park. Let's try that and put this off and see how that works. But that's just kind of the way I'm leaning. I wouldn't favor going forward. However, let me open it up to public comment at this point. Is there anyone in the room that cares to comment? Yes, please. Finally, you're saying. All right. Please state your name and the city you live in.
Shelby Stephenson, and I live in Troutdale.
Okay.
And I have two things. One is other Troutdale resident couldn't be here and gave me copies to give you guys because she knew I was coming. But I have mine own first, so I'll read mine. So good evening, councilors and mayor. Thank you very much for letting me share a few comments. First, I feel the ordinance may affect our residents more negatively than positively, as the idea to open up the parks to dogs with some restrictions will then make some other parks and greenways off limits to dogs, all because a waterway is present. Seems like there should be a more reasonable solution. So I wasn't against dogs. I kind of still like the idea of dogs in some parks, and maybe not some, but specifically the watermark thing bothers me because I used to take my dog all the time to 1,000 Acres and we would play in the water. So now you're saying dogs can't play in the water. And I know people that take their dogs to Beaver Creek and play along the water. Sometimes they throw the ball in, it goes in the water, sometimes they don't. So I'm bothered by that. So let me I'll finish reading my other comments. My other comment has more to do with the influence of the Parks Master Plan Community Survey. The survey failed in that the response rate of Troutdale residents was a mere 1.5% of the population and does not reflect a meaningful percentage. I know having the parks allow dogs was a high priority in the survey and perhaps a driving force in this ordinance, but it may not be the priority we all think it is. I have a dog and I love the idea of being able to take my dog with me to parks, but I don't like what this ordinance will do to some dogs and their owners not being able to go to certain areas, as well as some residents not wanting to be around dogs. So
All right.
that was my comments. And then I have Sherry Winters wanted this to be read into the record if it can, so.
Oh, go ahead and read it. Is it long? I mean,
Page.
yeah, go ahead if you want.
She put a lot of thought into this. I have copies for all of you guys if you want. She sent them, so I'll read it. Dear council members and mayor, I am sorry I could not be with you in person tonight, but I had a prior commitment. Thank you for allowing my comments to be heard. I am Sherry Winters and I am on the PAC, but tonight I come to you as a citizen of Troutdale for nearly 30 years, concerned about the effect of part of this dog ordinance. 3 points I would like to bring up. First, I would like to draw attention to Part D4, which states dogs will be prohibited within 100 feet of the ordinary high water line of the river, stream, or other surface water body unless otherwise posted. I do not own a dog, but love dogs and know that some dogs love water. This ordinance seems to be written in such a way that dogs and dog owners, handlers, would now be excluded from many areas, including the Sandy River and Beaver Creek. Also, the future development of the waterfront, the confluence, would fall within this 100-foot line, thus preventing walking dogs in that area. As for Beaver Creek Canyon, this ordinance makes it impossible to go down into the canyon with a dog. I have frequented this area on many occasions over the past 20+ years and have never gone down there without a dog for my own safety. I have encountered kids swimming, searching for crawdads, and riding bikes. Sometimes the kids have dogs with them. There are also people that walk down there with dogs, especially looking for a little workout and an escape to nature. I have run into horses as well as homeless camping. I have watched kids on motorcycles come flying down the trail and have seen the tracks made in the lower flat area by them. Garbage, tires, bike frames, and car parts are some of the items I have seen in or by the creek, none of which come from dogs. If you limit who can go into the green space, the canyon, you close off a piece of Troutdale to responsible dog owners that pick up after their dogs, as well as people like me that want to visit this space but do not feel safe without a dog as a form of protection. Responsible residents are the eyes needed to keep the city aware of what is going on in this space. The net result is punishing these residents. Secondly, I was told the reason for the 100-foot line has some connection with salmon habitat. I would argue that dogs in that area are not compromising the salmon habitat. The greater impact on the habitat in the canyon comes from others' usage, as well as the impact from upstream. Runoff from roads and properties have a greater impact on water quality. I have seen salmon on a few occasions, but the low and warm water levels would be the cause for little or no salmon returning. Lastly, I have a great deal of concern about the director having the say over these areas. From the ordinance, director means the director of community development, public works for the city, and the directors authorized representatives. One, as staff are not necessarily residents of Troutdale, I believe we need to keep the accountability with those who are elected. I do not believe it is in the best interest of Troutdale to give this responsibility to anyone other than those elected. Two, I cannot see how this part of the ordinance could reasonably be enforced. Please don't punish responsible individuals. Thank you so much for your time. I strongly urge you to modify the dog ordinance language. Sherry Winters.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Anyone else wishing to make public comment at this, who's in the room? If not, I'll open it to anyone on Zoom.
Hi, I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, please.
My name is Carol Reynolds. I live in the city of Troutdale, a long-term resident. And I'm one of those folks that believes that the rules to allow dogs on leashes in our parks is a very good one. And I think Sunrise Park is a perfect example of that. My understanding that Sunrise Park is the only park in the city of Troutdale where leash dogs are allowed, and I'm there on a regular basis, probably have seen Commissioner One there with my poodles. What I find in Sunrise Park is that we have a lot of people with their dogs on leashes, responsible citizens, and we kind of self-police when there's someone there with a dog off leash or an aggressive dog. We're able to point to the rules that are established and keep the area safe for everyone. I'd say any day that I'm there, there's probably 20% of the people with dogs and the 80% of the people without dogs. And we seem to have been able to coexist with our dogs on leashes. So I think that the request by the citizens of Troutdale is not turn all of our parks into a free-for-all for people with dogs, but to establish rules that say you can have your dog here as long as it's behaved and as long as it's on the leash and it's not running free. And I agree with the concept that once we allow the dogs in parks with the rules, it's going to be easier to enforce those rules because we're not making a blanket statement, no dogs in parks, but we're setting up the guidelines. I've been walking at Sunrise Park pretty much the whole time I've lived here in Troutdale, and I've never had a dog run up to me or run up to one of the children that are playing with a negative result. So, you know, I'm just one person, but I've seen the coexistence. I know that with the Parks Committee, that Glen Otto was one of the parks that they excluded, and I think that the proposed ordinance will allow the exclusion of certain parks for certain reasons. But I really feel that the survey, I never took the survey, but I really feel that the survey indicates that there is, for us residents in Troutdale, we really want to be able to take our dogs to the parks on their leashes, and we want to be safe as well. So if we're not allowing people like me to take my dogs into a controlled area, where am I going to go with my dog? The more people you have out there following the rules, the responsible citizens, it's going to be easier to enforce the bad guys. And, you know, we can call then and say, we've got an aggressive dog running in the park. Where now, if you just say, I have a dog in the park, there's really nothing you can do to enforce it. Again, I want to say that I think the people of Troutdale aren't looking for necessarily all parks to have an off-leash area. I think we just want to take our dogs there and be legal doing it. The only park I go to with my dog is Sunrise Park. And to address someone on the council who said, you know, how many dog bites does it take for it to be okay? You know what? Walking my dog on the street, I am more likely to have a dog bite, someone bite me or my dog, than in the park, because I know in the park, the rules can be enforced. And there are people around me, like-minded people, who are going to help me in enforcing those rules. Gosh, I appreciate you letting me have my say and telling you my thoughts on leashed dogs in dog parks. I have poodles. I don't have aggressive dogs, but I really feel that as long as we can set those rules, and the more people you have out there legally with their dogs in the parks, the less likely we are going to have the bad guys out there with their dogs just running amok. So thank you for listening to my thoughts tonight.
Okay, well, thank you. I assume that's a picture of your dog on the screen there.
Yeah, that's one of my past dogs.
All right, anyone else in Zoom land wish to address the council on this issue in public comment?
This is Paul Wilcox, President RIPMA.
Go ahead, Paul.
Okay. First, I wanted to answer a question that Councilor One had about leashes. The ordinance specifies an 8-foot leash, which is the actually the county standard. So I'm sure that's why they chose that length number. I would have preferred the 6-foot standard that the Oregon State Parks use, but I can see why they chose 8. I've seen real leashes advertised on Amazon that go up to 26 feet. So that's a problem. I'm not sure who's going to be out there enforcing leash length. But my main thing is I watched, either watched or attended the Parks Committee meetings, and I got the impression that there was a general consensus that dogs in Glen Otto Park would be inappropriate because of the setting there. And I'm not talking about just the Glen Otto Beach, but the area around Sam Cox, the Sam Cox complex also. I know Sugar Pine promotes themselves as dog friendly, so that kind of complicates the situation. But I would encourage council to encourage staff to not allow dogs in Glen Otto Park at the very least. I do sympathize with Councilor Wittrin also that, you know, there should be parks that are dog free for people that just don't want to be around parks or have their small children, you know, at risk from dogs. So I don't know how quite to address that without you know, picking and choosing which parks get dogs and which don't. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Paul. Anyone else in Zoom land wish to address the council on this issue? I think I'm at this point, I'm not in favor of moving forward with the a second reading. I would, and these are just thoughts, we can discuss this any way you want, but Sunrise Park, I do remember was allowed dogs on leashes. Isn't that right? Or is it?
I don't think that's a formalized policy of the city that I'm aware of.
Because I've known people,
Formal pilot project.
I've known lots of people who do walk dogs in that park, and that's the only one I can think of like that. Anyway, my original suggestion was that we don't move forward with this in its present form. You heard comments. I don't know if there's some way to identify a park like Sunrise Park as being dogs on leashes permitted, I would be okay with that because I actually thought that was the rule. I do want to move forward with the off-leash dog park that's already, we've enacted it, it's coming into being. But I do not want to go forward with the ordinance that we have tonight. So I don't, if someone wants to make a motion, we see if there's a second.
Can I offer a couple of comments? And again, I
Sure.
want to be clear that I'm not trying to sell you this, Council President Ritma. I'm trying to offer you my professional opinion or advice on things to help you all make the best informed decision you can. That's my one and only aim. I think the last speaker, Ms. Reynolds, brought up a pretty good point, which is when we talk about enforcement, you say, well, we can't enforce these rules, we can't enforce the existing rules. The fact of the matter is that what we've observed is there are going to be dogs in the parks, regardless of what the rules say. And what this would do is provide some structure to that. So I think that is one possible advantage of having an ordinance that actually addresses it. I wanted to address the other Ms. Reynolds comment about, and a couple other comments about the proximity to waterways, and particularly Beaver Creek Greenway. Of course, the Sandy River Delta is not part of this. That's not one of our parks. And the Sandy River, other than a Canal Park, is not really part of this because we don't have any other parks along the river. But if you don't change the existing ordinance prevents dogs in those places because they're not allowed in parks at all or greenways. So right now, dogs are not allowed in the greenway by ordinance. So enacting this ordinance is not going to make it more restrictive. And I think that was maybe Ms. Reynolds' concern, is this was going to somehow make it more restrictive on dogs in the greenway. It's not. They're prohibited there now by the ordinance. The reason for that prohibition in the ordinance is because, in the proposed ordinance, is because of environmental permits that the city's currently down by, our stormwater permits. The Beaver Creek is TMDL listed for bacteria. And so one of the management measures for reducing bacteria specifically, yes, there are many other pollutants, as Ms. Reynolds mentioned in her statement, many other issues, but there is a specific limitation for bacteria, and one of the management measures that DEQ requires us to do is to limit domestic animals near the creek. That's why that's in there. It also addresses the Glenelg Park beach, as well, which is a place where nobody thinks there should be dogs. But it was certainly not an intent to keep people out of the greenway with their dogs. I would love to allow people in the greenway with their dogs. I think it's a great, nature is the best place to walk your dogs, but unfortunately we have these environmental restrictions from our stormwater permits in this specific listing for Beaver Creek. And the last thing I wanted to address from some of the comments is some concerns about the director's authority, which is me in this case, to establish some of these, establish this park can have dogs, that park can have dogs. The reason it was written that way was to give it some flexibility. If you were to put in the ordinance specifically this park, that park, that park, that park, that's it. There's no changing it other than coming back for more hearings and more meetings and those sorts of things. But
don't try to save us time. And
well, I was going to address. I was going
really
to offer. My intent was just to make it easy and flexible. But if
we
the
actually
council
like to be in control.
If the council wants to have a tighter grip on that, if you will, I could easily change that to say that by resolution the council can designate certain parks, as being allowed, dogs not allowed. If that would be more comfortable.
Not this ordinance, please.
But that
I don't. I'm actually.
Well,
I would entertain a motion not to move forward with this.
Well, if I may, this is a first reading and we don't vote on them
I don't even want
at
to go to a
first.
second reading.
Right, well, if there's a consensus of council
Yes.
to direct staff not to bring it back, that's typically the way we do it, but not by an
Excellent.
actual vote.
Excellent. Is there a consensus of council?
No, I would say I hear what you're saying, and I actually wanted to I'm not speaking to Jordan, but I want to say there's a wide range of people here, and this is why we are on this council. And I want to say that I hear what Jordan is saying, and I hear kind of what you're saying, Dave, and something that sort of makes sense. I think Carol put it perfectly of why I think that people in this need to have the ability to walk their dog in the park. But I also think that it's really important to understand that people like Jordan who don't really particularly care for dogs, that's what I got. If that's reading into it too much, I apologize, but need a safe space that they know they can go to, right? So like, look, dogs aren't allowed at Glen Auto Park. He can go there with his family, he can have a great picnic, he can play on the equipment, whatever, he can go down to the beach, and that's going to be, I don't want to say policed, but that's a safe space he can go. He could go to Columbia Park, because Columbia Park, there's the Imagination Station there, there's an off-leash dog park that's surrounded, it's enclosed, people can go there. That's another great place. I'm thinking off the top of my head of like 2 places that we can say people can go to these parks. There's not going to be dogs, and you guys can be there, knowing full well that your neighborhood parks, you can have a dog walking through there. And I think, like I thought and Carol said, is that responsible people are going to go through there. There's rules, there's regulations. Someone can easily come up to, somebody and say like, hey, would you mind just putting your dog on the leash so we can keep this nice privilege that we have. It's just, we would all appreciate it. I think that's how I kind of see it happening. And just hearing what you guys had to say about having a place where you can go, I think designating a couple of parks that maybe are off the beaten path would be a nice compromise of something. And I think that what I'm hearing from this is that we need to sort of have maybe a compromise from dogs everywhere running rampant to no dogs at all anywhere. So somewhere meeting in the middle, I feel like it's kind of a nice place to be, because I think people do want to take their animals out, and people want to feel safe in their environment.
All right.
I'm going to say that, households with dogs are not in the majority, so why should they be in the majority of parks? I would think it should be the other way around, where there are a park or 2 that dogs on leash are allowed, and we see how that goes.
I would instinctively kind of second that as well, but in its present form, yeah, this resolution does not work for me either. But I do believe there is a compromise out there to hit all the constituents to make some sort of happiness happen. And when we talk about enforcement, to say, hey, you can't be, who's ever administering the enforcement, can't be at Glen Auto Park. But you do have other options, A, B, and C, to take your dog to, and that's the compromise. So, but there's my 2 cents.
Can I ask you a quick question? I don't know if you know, for instance, City of Gresham or City of Portland, Fairview, what are their dog rules? Does anybody know?
I am a resident of the city of Portland, and I am a dog owner, and I frequent many dog parks in the city of Portland. Portland city parks allow dogs. Pretty much every dog park, well, not every dog park, but most dog parks that I visit have no fence boundary. There is a open designated.
I'm not talking like a specific dog park, like regular parks. So like
Gresham, they
Laurel
allow
Park.
dogs on leashes in all their parks.
City of Portland does as well.
The only rule is
Okay,
no
that's-
off-leash dogs in the Gresham Park.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Thank you.
May I ask a question, or should I my comment at that? I guess my question is just, we heard from Councilor One mentioning that he frequently walks his dog in Sunrise Park, and the ambiguity around the rules governing dogs in Troutdale City Parks was present even in this very discussion, not being clear on what those rules exactly are. We heard from a member of.
You happen to know? I mean, you're the parks director, so you know, is it allowed or not? It used to be.
The ordinance, the domestic animals ordinance is right there in front of all of you, and it clearly states that dogs are not allowed in any city parks in Troutdale. And that's the ordinance, as it is. And we also heard from a member of the Parks Advisory Committee who stated that the entire time she's lived in the city of Troutdale, she's walked her dog in Beaver Creek Canyon, which is also against this ordinance that we currently have on the books. So my question is, if a member of city council walks his dog in the parks and a member of the Parks Advisory Committee also walks their dog in the parks, can we reasonably expect the citizens of Troutdale to not do the same?
That isn't a fair question.
No?
Jonah,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
But that isn't a fair question. But if this ordinance said, was limited to dogs on leashes are permitted in Sunrise Park, I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Okay.
But that isn't what this ordinance says. And I'm glad that it seems to be working for people who use Sunrise Park after a fashion. It may not be strictly dotting each I and crossing each T, but the question before us is, do we want to move forward with this ordinance? I'm hearing a yes and I'm hearing a no. Glenn?
No.
And Sandy also is a no, and I'm a no. So we don't have consensus of council. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm not saying
Councilor
that,
Wyman.
I hear what you guys are saying, and I think that also the city is also not doing a very good job because there is dog waste stations in the park, right? So you can't go to a park and have a dog waste station and be like, it's definitely not a place where I'm supposed to bring my dog. So we, as a city, are not governing ourselves very well, right? So,
Well, that's another question and a good one.
but I think that according to this and hearing what I'm hearing is that, sure, I can say no to this as it is, right? You talk me into it, right? Just like, you know what I mean? Like, I can get talked, but I want to have a compromise. I want to say, and I would challenge us to say, like, to have something where we can allow dogs into parks, do we need to have specific parks that we say yes to?
Yes, I actually think that's necessary.
Is that something
Sunrise being
that's
one
in
of
there you can get
them.
behind?
And not just name a couple of parks that don't have dogs. Let's just, we're opening up the off-leash dog park on the 22nd of October, or somewhere around Columbia Park. I can't remember where. And I always thought Sunrise Park did allow dogs, but if it doesn't, we should correct that. That would be a compromise. And if there's other parks that you want to bring forward, we could think about it. But I think there's a consensus. We don't want to go forward and have the staff identifying where dogs are allowed and where they aren't. Anyway, so back to the drawing board. I'm sorry.
Well, there's no need to apologize. I'm here to implement the policy that you all want. I guess the question that we would have is what do you want us to bring back?
Tonight, we're not gonna be able to give you exact direction. I mean,
Council President, if I could add, you cannot take a vote tonight on the issue?
no, we won't.
Okay, yeah, because you
We're
said
asking you not to bring it back, though, for a second reading.
according to the ordinances, when we present something at a first hearing, the public expects it to come to a second hearing under the ordinance. Because to take official
What
vote.
about if there's a consensus not to bring it back?
Well, what I was hearing was, if I may, is that there is a consensus to rework it to the extent that there is a limited list of parks at which the dogs can be allowed off leash. What exactly that is, I don't know, but perhaps if you were to bring it back as you have earlier described with to be done by resolution by council, so that only one vote is needed to adopt a list of parks that are on or off, that might be something that council could vote for, but it might not.
Or the other way, the other way to do it, Council President, is that somebody needs to make a motion like you. I move to amend the ordinance and bring it back to say that this new ordinance shall only apply to Sunrise Park. So this is the only, so you could say, and then somebody else could move to amend it to say it'll apply to Whedon Park also, then you all vote on it.
Are you saying we cannot, as a council, not bring this back.
No,
Order
you
order
could-
the staff not to bring it
Well,
back.
there is a way to do it. There is a way to kill something, is to move to table a matter.
Definitely.
But it was not, it wasn't noticed as a vote going to be taken tonight. But I believe that is allowed.
A move to table?
I want to ask a question. So,
I don't want to give you direction, Travis, tonight
No,
on how to
I
amend
want to
this thing.
offer some options to the council because I heard some,
Well, all right.
not,
Well, I guess my question would be my question one is it something that we could agree on tonight, be like to amend it to include these 3 parts, and I'm picking 3, just saying out of the blue, it doesn't have to be 3, but to do that. Because I'm not also hearing that like, I don't want it to just go away.
No,
forever.
I expect it'll come back in another form. But
that's what I was trying
Do
to
we
get
need to
direction on.
do we need to give guidance
Make a
to,
self-purpose out of this. It just isn't gonna work.
That's what I'm trying to get direction on where we go from
That's
there.
my direction. That would be my
The
direction.
direction is no direction, Councilor.
Yeah, that's no
No,
direction's
my
right,
direction
right?
is don't bring it back.
No,
Don't bring it back.
but you anticipate it coming back, and we're asking for direction from council. What do you want brought back?
Do we have a motion to table this? I will move
I
to
move
table.
to table this ordinance indefinitely.
Is there a second? And I'll second it.
No, the chair doesn't move or second, the
All
chair.
right. Do we have a second?
And I can clarify too, before we vote,
I think we can provide direction.
That's what I was thinking.
yeah, that's.
Direction to amend it in 2 weeks to have the
No,
amendments?
no, not to come back in 2 weeks, but I think we can say, maybe even send it back to Parks and say, pick a park or 2 to trial this.
If I may, Council President Ritma. I heard the council saying there was a certain direction they ultimately wanted to go. And I'm trying to find out how you want to get there.
I think I'm being very clear. I don't want this ordinance, but if Sandy's idea would be, Ed, can we do it that way? Motion.
Yes, it's
to-
been,
a motion to table, refer it back to the Parks Committee for identifying a couple of parks and bring the ordinance back in 2 months or so.
that's been done as a consensus of council in the past, rather than as an actual vote to refer it back to the
Okay.
committee that it came from.
Well, if I just want
That's
to
a
say something really
compromise.
quick, is that if the parks unanimously decided that they wanted this, which was including every park, can we as a council give Travis direction on which parks to include for dogs, that dogs can go to? That seems pretty
Yeah,
simple,
well,
like,
the council can do anything. I mean, we are.
I would
Well, I know, but I don't-
suggest that we
yeah.
say, hey, pick 3 parks that
No
you
more
need-
than 3. let's
that
just
you
say.
recommend, and put in there that council can put in a resolution to add parks as needed,
Or subtract.
or subtract.
Sure.
Yeah, we can change it.
Yes, that would be I would like to see our consensus go through to kick it back to parks, add suggestions, and then add that we get to add or subtract as needed.
Yeah, we'll have the final say. Is that clear enough? Do we have a consensus?
I don't think that was not clear for me whatsoever.
Oh,
I would like to just take a second to stop. I want to hear, I agree with what Jordan said, which is, I think, and I'm gonna say this out loud, and if no one wants to agree with me, that's fine, to give Travis 3 parks that we want to allow dogs in. I don't think it needs to go back to
Or should
parks.
the Parks Committee pick it?
They picked all of them, so they're fine with it. They're fine with it as a majority, right? Like, so
I think
we, as a majority, are not okay with it, so let's pick 3 parks or 2 parks that we can agree on and send it back, and then that's what it comes back with.
I think I have a way for you to get what you're trying to do, if I can have a chance to offer it to you. And we could wait and bring this back in a couple of months if you want to give some time for the off-leash dog park to, be broken in or whatever it may be. But I would suggest that we bring back an amendment to the ordinance that simply says the council, by resolution, can designate parks where dogs are allowed on leash. And then a subsequent resolution, you could specify those parks based on a recommendation from the Parks Advisory Committee, presumably. And then if you wanted to change that list in the future, shrink it, grow it, do whatever you want to it, then you just do a subsequent resolution anytime you want to do that, rather than hardwiring certain parts into the ordinance itself. That would seem a more sensible way to approach it, and give you all and future councils a very easy way to manage that list of parks. And
Is that clear now? Is that clear?
Yeah,
enough?
I think that that's great.
Would we have a consensus on directing staff in those ways? Bring it back in a couple of months, let's see how the off-leash park works, and establish which parks permit on-leash dogs by council resolution. Glenn, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I made that motion, and then I wanted to clarify that, I would rather look at all the options, not just our existing parks. I think Sunrise Park makes sense, but I don't know about the other parks. And I also would want the neighbors to be notified that this change is going to occur. Sure. I've kind of lost a lot of faith in staff on this subject after learning what I did tonight. Like, why was it in the staff report that Glen Auto Park, the Parks Department said no dogs there, but it remained in the report that it was all parks. And I know there's a lot of pressure.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, we just learned from Ms. Reynolds on public comment that she got involved in the parks meetings, and they said they do not want dogs at Glen Auto Park, but it didn't make the report.
I think because we were focusing in the report more on the fact that the ordinance is written so that those exclusionary zones can be established by the director. And Glen Auto Park was in mind when we wrote that. I mean, that.
Well, let's back up. The Parks Committee did not vote to exclude Glen Auto from the ordinance.
That's correct.
There was discussion.
They did not vote for that. They voted to keep them 100 feet away from the high water mark. The upper area of Glen Auto Park, the Parks Committee overwhelmingly said the parks up there are dogs up there are okay. So that's what the Parks Committee did.
But yet staff decided on their own to have the dog poop bag picked up wherever they're called, and they removed the signage. And they've been allowing Sugar Pine to invite their dog. I mean, you really, to me, that's a loss of credibility.
Well, Sugar Pine, they lease that property, we have no control to tell Sugar Pine what to do.
Yeah, we can.
Oh, I think we could.
Well,
I
it's
think
not
we
part
could.
of
We own it.
I'm not picking on Sugar Pine, because I love those people over there, but we are the landlord and they are the tenant, and they don't get to change ordinances as a tenant of a park.
But just like your house, you can allow dogs into your house whether you own it or rent it. They rent it and they can allow dogs into their restaurant. So that's.
So they can violate a city
No,
ordinance?
they're not, because it's not the park. I mean, just like you own your
Can
house
we
and can let dogs in. they
Stay
can let
on
dogs into
subject
their
here.
house.
All right.
Yeah, no, they're
So,
not violating it.
I mean, are you okay with the compromise?
Well, on a few conditions, I don't like the part about who's in charge. I liked what you said, that council.
No, it would be by council resolution.
Okay.
Not
Council
the direction to come.
And then I would want to make sure that the property owners in the effect, like so many feet, are notified. And then I'd also like to examine other options, like finding a more suitable spot other than one of our parks to allow dogs like we did. I loved our new dog park's location, and that was a big thing, that there was no houses around it. Because nonstop barking 24/7 is no fun. I mean, I deal with it. I'm used to it at the park. It's like an amphitheater when dogs start barking. And again, Sprouting's Bluff, and it just echoes. And you can have a dog barking at Lewis Clark program, and it sounds like they're in your house. So, I think
That's
it's
a good thing
important.
about the resolution, is we'll be able to take them back off. if we get-
Right, just so you understand, Councilor White, no notice is gonna go to nearby people at all before the next hearing in 2 weeks, because the new one that's coming back will not designate any parks at all.
No, we're thinking 2 months. We're thinking.
Well,
two
whenever it
months.
comes back, it will not say in there any parks that this applies to. That will be a continuing resolution change. So there's nobody to notify until the Parks Advisory Committee makes a recommendation to you about what parks should be covered under this ordinance. Is that where we're going? I think that's.
That's how what I understood council would like to be asking for, yeah.
And I would also ask that this council have our signs put back up, have those dog bags removed, and let's enforce our current ordinances until we make a change. Let's not do it without informing council. And like it's been done, because I think it's made really a mess out of this situation. At least it has for me. John, I know you're new, so don't take this personal.
Oh, I don't, it's all
Nothing
right.
personal.
And and just to echo what Travis said, I have no agenda here. This is ultimately your decision, and it's not even the town that I live in. And so whatever you see as the best decision for Troutdale Parks, I have no problem with. The only thing that I am seeking in any of this is direction, and is knowing what to tell citizens when they ask me, where can I take my dog? Because right now, I kind of don't know what to tell them. And so you know, I'm just seeking some direction and guidance as to how I should inform the community about their parks.
Well, we have, you know, the Delta Parks, which is a massive dog walking park. Lewis and Clark State Park allows dogs, and our new dog park would be a suggestion for now.
But as Councilor One alluded to, I think that people have a strong desire to be able to walk out their front door and walk to a park a few blocks from their house.
That's something we decide.
Okay.
We decide that.
Okay.
I will say, just on the note of removing infrastructure related to dogs, because dogs are currently ubiquitous in the parks, and the 4 full-time parks workers that I have on my staff, they're not going to spend all day, every day in the parks writing tickets to people with dogs. If we remove those poop bag stations, it's going to be adding to a sanitation issue in the meantime, and so
It's a mixed message, and
it is.
before that happened, dogs were not allowed in the park because we had an officer that would divert them. And we also had an officer checking coolers for alcohol.
A sheriff deputy?
Yeah. Well,
Council, I think, sure, that's only Glen Auto Park. We have a lot of other parks in the city, and we do not have the resources to put, as he
well,
said.
that was gonna be my
put
next piece, direction on this, was gonna be, I also wanna see, what does the enforcement look like? How are we gonna manage if we change these rules? Who's gonna be the one enforcing them? Because, you know, we're having trouble right now, if you haven't noticed, enforcing rules.
Right.
So I'd
This
like
is
to
gonna
see
have
all
to be-
that.
This is gonna be a
So it's a
budget
holistic
year.
approach.
This is gonna be, the council and the budget committee is gonna have to decide if that's a budget priority to hire more park guards to keep dogs
But
out
it's
of
almost
parks.
cheaper in the long run to find more areas for dogs.
It definitely is. Because that's
Yeah.
very expensive if you
And
want to police, we don't even have.
There's your
law
direction.
enforcement. Okay. I think we have direction.
We have our clear direction.
Sandy, do you want to weigh in?
I think this is all kind of going well, where we basically can pick a park or two. And I keep hearing 3, and I'm going to keep going back to 1 or 2 as a trial. And that, yeah, council gets to pick where those locations are. And I would like to see some of the no dog signs actually exist, even if we don't get rid of the doggy bags. But I think that, yeah, that's a really mixed message when you say, here's a doggy bag next to the no dog sign.
Well, at least maybe going down into the Beaver Creek, I think. Because
Yeah.
there is no,
Yeah.
just over there the other day.
Of course, if the council wants us to remove all those dogway stations, we absolutely will. Many of those were put up many years ago, and the reason was, as I understood at the time, I was very arm's length from all this back then. I was off managing other stuff, projects and stuff. But the parks folks back then, and they built a lot of those themselves, actually. They were homemade, the first ones, and they said, well, people are taking their dogs anyway, and they're not picking up the poop, so you know, we'll just
All
put
right,
these
that
up.
is not
Yeah.
included in the direction we're giving, although Glenn
Okay.
can probably get
I'll-
it in there when we
I'll await
finally
further
get it.
direction on that one.
No, but
I think we're clear on how you guys want to approach this, and we can bring something later on that'll accomplish that, I think.
Give it a couple of months. We'll
Yeah,
see how
no.
the off-leash park works.
Yeah.
And
we'll
come
see
back
you-
with
we'll see
something.
you back then.
seconded and passed to table it.
Can I?
No, we won't. It's just staff. We're giving you-
This is just staff direction.
Right, because we can modify this and bring it back and.
Not in 2 weeks. Not in 2 weeks. I want to see how the off-leash park works.
Are there any specific results from the off-leash park you'd like to see? Okay, I'm just curious what the metric is.
I don't want to write it tonight.
Oh,
I mean, this
I
is
think
taking
the
long
writing is
enough.
pretty simple because it's.
Yeah.
Well,
Guidelines.
I was
Yeah,
only gonna ask, like, what do they have to write? Like, we just give them direction, he can come back with what we asked him to come back
Yeah,
with, and
honestly, with the.
honestly, I don't know what
let's-
having if you want me to be quiet about it, I can. If you don't wanna talk about it anymore, if that's really what you don't wanna do.
Well, obviously, I'm willing to listen, but look, we've talked this to death. I do not think, many years of working on, being on the council, trying to write something at this point in the evening is not a good idea, period. It just isn't. We're gonna miss something. Let's let staff come back in a couple of months with a proposal that follows the direction we've given, the nice, clear direction we've given tonight.
Okay, so now that we've given direction, do we procedurally need to table this one in order for it to come back in 2 months?
No,
Apparently not.
no. So let me just finish by saying, I think I understand your intent. I will do my best to implement it, and we will see you sometime later.
Okay, thank you, Travis. Really appreciate it. And Jonah.
Thank you.
Let's go on to staff communicate, oh no, resolution naming a trail. Oh, great.
You're stuck with me still, and Jonah as well.
Okay.
Sorry, let me find my place here. All right, next item. So this is, we're gonna be talking about a resolution naming a trail, the Chuck Chuck Trail. So the background on this is Troutdale Reynolds Industrial Park, phase 1, constructed 2011. They built the segment of trail that's on top of the levee. City's basically the operator of that trail. We maintain it, just the trail surface, of course. The levee is maintained by the district, as you all talked about earlier. Fast forward to phase 2 of TRIP, short right after that was completed. The intent was to complete the other segments of the trail along the levee within Troutdale. The port took the leadership role on that, assembled a whole gaggle of partners. And I remember going to meetings with these partners years ago when all the intergovernmental agreements were put together and all those things, and the council approved many of them, all those agreements and so forth. That was a long time ago. And it's finally come into fruition. The main segments of that trail are going to start construction here this month, assuming the permits all get issued when expected. That segment of trail commences at the corner of Northeast Harlow Road. And if you're familiar with it, just off of Graham, Northeast Harlow Road kind of makes a sharp hook, and right there at that corner will be the start of one of the segments where it would go over to the levee and connect with the existing segment. And you have the existing segment that goes over to Sundial, where this project will also pick up there, continue the trail over to our western city limits along the levee. So that project's getting underway after many years of planning and collaboration between the various partners. Along the way, I think it was several years ago, with some Metro folks were compiling a bunch of regional maps and stuff, and they were, of course, one of the many partners in this project, and they said, what are you guys going to call this trail? And we said, we don't know. So we went and talked to the Parks Advisory Committee. What do you want to call this trail? And so they started talking about it, and the then PAC, this is, I think, I want to say 2018, something like that, 19 maybe, did some research online and came up with what seemed like a great name, the Waboon Trail. It was a Native American term that meant, had several meanings, East Wind among others. And everybody said this is a great name, and we all agreed, all the staff at that time, and we agreed it was a great idea. But for whatever reason, it didn't get taken forward to council right away. And then in the meantime, as we were starting to get ready to go ahead and bring it to the council, we started looking into that and found that Waboon is not a local indigenous word. It's a word from a Upper Great Plains tribal people. And so I told the PAC that and said, yeah, really should be a local indigenous name for this trail. So we asked Mr. Greg Archuleta, member of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, an expert in local Chinook culture and language, to help them out, advise them. And so he talked to them about a number of options. They reviewed those options and they ultimately settled on the name Chuck Chuck, which means bald eagle in Chinook Wawa, which is the common trade language of various local indigenous peoples. And so that's what they've recommended for the council, to name this trail. Why name it? Well, why do we need a name? Naming trails is very helpful, obviously, for wayfinding and referencing things, official documents, policies, people telling you how to get places. Trail signage, especially, a trail that's going to connect ultimately to an urban rural area and all those kinds of things, people to figure out how to get around. Obviously, this, by selecting a Native American name, that's in keeping with one of the goals of the Parks Master Plan, which is to involve indigenous peoples in the planning of our parks infrastructure. It honors Troutdale history because the indigenous communities of this area are part of Troutdale's history. And of course, we have a very strong tradition of honoring our history, and especially when it comes to naming things and streets and places and all those kinds of things. So this really seemed to fit the bill. The Parks Advisory Committee certainly felt so. So they recommended that forward to you to officially name this trail the Chuck Chuck Trail, and that's what's before you tonight. Adoption of this resolution would officially give that trail that moniker. One of the other advantages, as I mentioned in my staff report, is Mr. Archuleta provided a number of names, possible words, some of them based on some sort of concepts that we shared with them, and some are very difficult to pronounce, some very difficult to write, difficult to remember. Chuck Chuck, easy to write, easy to say, easy to remember, even if you don't speak Chinook. So that was another sort of practical advantage of this particular selection. So that's what the PAC has recommended, and it's before you tonight. I'll be happy to answer your questions, and join us here to help with that as well.
Anybody on council have questions?
Yeah, I think it's pronounced Chalk Chalk, not Chuck Chuck.
I would take your word for it. Chuck Chuck. Yeah. I thought on the phone when I was talking to Mr. Archuleta that it sounded more like Chuck Chuck, but I can confirm that with him.
Okay.
Yeah, and Chinook Wawa is I don't believe had a written language, and so so the exact spelling of it because it's phonetic, I'm not sure if there is a correct spelling, but there's definitely a correct pronunciation. So I will confirm that with him.
We certainly consult with Mr. Archuleta to get some pronunciation guidance. And it may be that neither one of those is exactly on, because obviously it's a different language, different dialect.
So then is the remainder of the trail was named Drover Trail. Is that still in
Never
town?
been officially named, I don't think, formally.
It was on a lot of documents.
Drover's Trail, if I may, is an actual street that runs from East Columbia River Highway in like an S shape and ends right under the railroad track at the river. It's actually a street.
Yeah, when the council designated that right of way, back when the thought was it would be a road, that was called Drover's Trail Road. Yeah. But as far as the trail itself, I don't think has been officially named. But this would not apply to that segment. You could name it that segment whatever you want in the future. You could name it also Chuck Chuck, or you could name it something else.
I kind of like the aspect of, I talked to Sharon Nesbitt how I got the name Drover's Trail, and I actually drove cattle to market that way. And I like the concept of the cowboy and the Indian names together. I also, after talking to Sharon, she said she had a great idea. She's like, why did that get sent to the Historic Preservation Committee as well as Parks? And I think that's something, there's no rush to name this trail tonight.
No.
I think that should maybe almost be standard procedure when we name something, so we get Parks perspective as well as the Troutdale historian perspective. And I don't have a problem with that name. I'm just thinking, and then we could also talk about maybe the rest of the trail, how that's going to play out. It's gonna get confusing when you got Chug Chug, a little piece of Drover's Trail, and you're left with this, a tiny segment that's gonna need to be named, so maybe look at those two things, have the Historic Preservation Committee look at this name that's being proposed, and also their ideas and input for naming the rest of it.
If that's the will of the council as a whole, then that's what we'll do.
That's gonna be my suggestion.
Any other comments from the council? I mean, your suggestion is to pull this resolution, not adopt it, and refer to the Historic Landmarks Committee, which seems like, how did who approached the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde for a consultant on this? Was it the Landmarks Committee, or was anybody?
That was our previous park superintendent started that conversation with Mr. Archuleta, who was a member of the Grand Ronde and the representative. Jonah continued that after along with the PAC.
And Mr. Archuleta is not a tribal official or official representative. He's a member, and he is a historian and an expert in Chinook Wawa language, but he's not an official representative of the tribe.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
They send him out for cultural things. The tribe sends him out to do cultural things, actually. He came out here and toured something we had at it recently. The other thing, you mentioned something that I was going to comment on.
Well, Glenn was suggesting.
Oh, the historic landmarks, that doesn't apply to trails that aren't historic necessarily. It applies to buildings, that committee under the ordinance.
I think he's just suggesting
Okay.
that in future,
yeah.
maybe we should bring them in when we're naming something, but I'm in favor of going ahead with this, but if there's no comments, Sandy, do you have a comment?
Oh, there's a lot of, I listened in when they picked the name, and there was a lot of good names they'd come up with. So I think I actually liked the one that was second, but this is fun.
Uh-oh.
I can address what was the second choice, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jonah. I think the two finalists, the other one was Walla Walla Wind,
right,
which is basically means east wind, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, and it's not direct translation of the word east as in the cardinal direction, but it's they refer to the east wind as the wind that came from Walla Walla.
Yeah.
So
I think that fell away kind of as much as anything else because Walla Walla is a town in Washington, so
yeah,
reference that. And they also like Chuck Chuck a lot.
Yep, that's fine.
And at a quick glance, it looks like all eagles out here in East County are on a growth pattern, so the name fits with what's going
it does
on,
fit.
so.
Seems good to me. All right, let me invite public comment. Penny, you're the only public left. You want to say anything? Okay, it's on one of your levies, so. Okay, then I'll go to the Zoom participants. Anyone want to comment on the resolution naming the trail the Chuck Chuck Trail? If not, seeing none, I am open for a motion.
Council President, I make a motion that we adopt the resolution naming the trail in Troutdale the Chuck Chuck Trail.
I'll second.
All right, I guess Counselor one maybe beat you, Sandy.
That's fine.
Second, and all right, please call the roll.
Council President Redmond.
Yes.
Councilor Pascal.
Yes.
Councilor One.
Yes.
Councilor White.
Yes.
Councilor Whitron.
Yes.
Councilor Glantz.
Yes.
All right, we'll move on to staff communications.
Great, thanks, Council President. Number one, as we've already talked about, October 22nd on a Sunday at 1 o'clock, the dog park will have a grand opening there next to Columbia Park. So that should be ready to go. There are already dogs out there walking in the fenced area, off leash, but it's okay there. It's designated for that. Number two.
What time is that on the 22nd?
12 o'clock.
Is it 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock?
12 o'clock on our website.
Okay, I'll check that. I thought that was a little early maybe, but We'll see, yeah. Right now, as Councilor Wittrin says, it's 12 o'clock on Sunday, the 22nd.
Okay.
The planning
The
commission,
22nd is Monday, I believe.
No, 16th is Monday.
Always, well, no, I meant the following. Am I,
22nd is a Sunday.
22nd is a Sunday?
because the 24th is our next
stand
council
corrected.
meeting, is a Tuesday.
All right.
Number 2, planning commission is meeting tomorrow night. They're having a work session on Main Streets on Halsey, and then they're having a official meeting talking about marijuana and psilocybin code changes, which are of interest to the council. So if you want to listen in and not comment, please, you're encouraged if you want to listen to the planning commission tomorrow night. Number 3, on October 21st, which is a Saturday, we are having a bulk waste event that over at the transfer station on Marine Drive, citizens could take large items. And there's also a hazardous residential products drop off at Mountain Community College. So October 21st, you have bulky items or hazardous items or places for you to go. Those are referred on our website. And finally, as was mentioned earlier by Council President, don't forget, next week, your garbage is picked up on Thursday, not Wednesday. Luckily, they went the day beyond, not the day before. It's easier. So yes, that's all I have, Council President.
All right, thank you. Council communications, I guess I'll start, and I'll start by saying, have a good evening. Passing. I don't know who's next. Let's go with Allison. Do you want to say something?
No, I don't have anything. Thanks.
Sorry, I kind of missed you. Jeffrey?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Glenn?
Yeah, on the Halsey Corridor, did you say that it's going before planning?
Yes, they're having a work session on Main Streets on Halsey tomorrow night.
Now, is that something I should be present for since I've been a liaison?
Well, you can listen, but as we usually admonish council members, saying things at committee meetings is discouraged since it has undue influence on them.
And I've been bringing this up and about the Metro Community Enhancement Fund, and I'd like to see that brought before council a second time and review the contract that they want us to sign, because I think the big hangup was the liability. They were putting all the liability on us, but I couldn't help but noticing that they did the same thing to us on this recycling program. All the liabilities on the city. Metro has zero liability, and I hate what happened with that program, and I think it's too important for our community just to let it go by. If you recall, Ashton Simpson, our Metro Council president, informed us that it was going to be split amongst Wood Village and Fairview, and that Metro would be in charge of it with East County Rising handling the administration for that program. And I'm thinking, if it's not too late, I would accept the liability over having Metro and East County Rising being in charge of it and having to split the money up with 2 other cities. So I'm asking that be brought on the next council meeting's agenda.
Just so you'll know, they, as Metro told us when they were here before, they have a contract with East County Rising. They can't break their contract. They can't give it back to us at this point. And everybody should have received a copy of that contract last summer or earlier in the summer when they were here. I don't know how long the contract is for with them.
Yeah, I did see it. It was pretty alarming.
But I do have to follow up with them because nothing's happened since they were here. Why haven't they started a process for taking grant requests? It's a good question to ask Councilor White, and I will ask them that.
Well, could we let them continue till their contracts up on the administration portion of it?
Yeah, I'll have to look at it myself or have Legal Beagle over here look at it because what the contract says with East County Rising.
And probably have to look at their code too, to see whether or not the contract actually complies with their code.
Okay, because it was really a great program. I hate to see it get lost, and we have a lot of really talented local artists that relied on that. It was a good way to get a project done, and also our nonprofit groups. So that's all I have.
Councilor Wittrin.
Good, thank you.
All right, Sandy?
Yep, I have a couple quick things. One is a little bit of a legal question. Let's say it's a planning commission meeting and there are 4 counselors listening in. Is that okay as long as we don't speak?
Yeah, I believe if you're listening in on Zoom, that probably constitutes a quorum. So the question is, and I can't answer off the top of my head now, whether that requires public notice. It is a noticed meeting of the planning commission, but not the city council. So the sticky part is the law's intention is to prohibit deliberation by a quorum. And so it may be possible. I'll have to look it up and get back to you. Sorry, I don't know at 10 o'clock at night. Sorry.
And then the other question, I was listening in on CAC, I think it was a week or two ago, and I was just curious. They were also curious if they have a citizen issue that they want to discuss and maybe send something to council on. Can they do that, or is it only via staff and council that what they talk about?
Citizen issue. Can you be more specific?
Well, I understand, because I got an email from the chairperson, and I told them I'd be happy to come to one of their meetings and talk through with them what the ordinance says they're allowed to do or not do. And I think it does generally say under the ordinance that they are to do things as directed from council. But I think historically, if they have a hot idea that they want to suggest council or ask council to do, they are free to do that. Basically, can we have permission to pursue this issue? It's kind of how it's come in the past.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. That was all from me. Thank you.
All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Oh, any opposed? I didn't hear anything. We are adjourned.
Well, you're not getting points for the shortest meeting tonight, are you?
Jim Nidoff was right.
I'll tell you.
Good night.
So we knew this dog park issue was going to be the big discussion.
Yes, I knew
There wasn't
it.
a lot going on.
I knew it.